So the first time I met you was after you poured a sweat lodge out on Aubrey's land a few weeks ago with Bobby Kennedy.
Mm.
And I've seen you perform before, but that was the first time I got to come up and give you a hug. And man, that was such a beautiful sweat. I was just, for some reason, I mean, you were leading it. So of course my attention was on you, but I was really feeling into your energy. And I think I even told you this the other day when we ran into each other. It's just the balance that you had of sharing deep wisdom, ancestral wisdom, and just holding chill space. And especially in a lodge where there was kind of a lot of diversity, right? You had men and women in there. You had a lot of different ages. Based on some of the guys groaning on my side, I sensed it might have been their first one.
There was a lot of
there were some guys barely hanging in there.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be the one guy that wusses out. And then over here to my left is freaking Bobby Kennedy, who's just a champ, and it was just such a special couple hours that we spent in there. So after that, I mean, I've wanted to have you on the show for a while anyway, just because your music's beautiful and you seem like such a great guy and have mutual friends and all that. But yeah, I was sitting in that lodge and I was like, I want to hear more of this. You just have such an interesting life path and beautiful dharma in the world. So yeah, so welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lou. Yeah, it's really good to be here.
And as I was telling you, I've only been able to do this a couple of times because I've only had a few musicians on, but I'm so glad you brought an instrument. And I think a great way to start would be having you share some of your music with us.
Be honored to. The little instrument comes from West Africa. It's known as the ngoni. This was made by a good friend of mine, Aruna, who now lives out in the desert outside of between Phoenix and Sedona. So he made this one for me. It fits in an overhead. So it's a smaller version. The traditional ones would have a massive gourd that'd be huge. These African gourds, But
so you carry that on?
This one goes on the plane.
That's epic.
So it's exactly the dimensions of an overhead. So I had to kind of design it just for that space. But yeah, this is the baby. So it's not as resonant as the big ones, but when I plug it in, especially for shows, but it's got a spirit to it, and it's I'd love to offer a song.
So is it, real quick before you start, I'm so curious about interesting instruments. So there's no fretboard.
No fretboard.
So is it in like an open tuning? Is it tuned to a chord so that?
Sort of,
Oh, okay.
yeah. This one in particular is in like an African pentatonic with a couple adjusted notes to kind of just give it some other colors. But you can kind of tune them into so it's more like it's an African harp essentially.
Okay.
So it's more like a harp, but different styles of playing it can be very percussive and much more, different than just a kind of your standard kind of harp playing. So,
right.
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the ancestor of the guitar in a way. When you think about it, right? When you're tracing it all the way back.
It looks very intimidating in terms of tuning it.
It takes a little.
I'm like, it's a lot of tuning knobs on that thing. Like, what is happening?
Yeah, it takes a little time. But yeah, I'd love to just offer us a song to kind of just set the energy here of our conversation and just welcome us all to space. So thank you all for being here with us today. On my way through the valley of my soul. On my way Shalom Mangoya. I'm away. Show me the way back home. Back home. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Take me home. Take me home. Take me home. Ooh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Take me home.
Wow. Thank you. Oh my God. What would it take to get you to come start every podcast for me?
It'd be a pleasure.
How much you making on tour? Let's talk.
Let's talk.
Oh, so beautiful, man. I was sitting there listening thinking, can I talk anymore? I don't know. I'm kind of done. Everything that needs to be said was just said, which is really, I think, a gift of your music. A robust gut is the cornerstone of health, but chemicals like glyphosate are polluting our food supply and trashing our ability to keep foreign particles out of the bloodstream. Now, for years, I've raved about intelligence of nature and its incredible gut support benefits. And that's largely because ION founder Dr. Zach Bush, a regular guest on the show, is deeply committed to helping people strengthen their gut barriers to resist the crap load of toxins coming in from our environment. So now I'm thrilled to announce their ION Plus line, which adds powerful botanicals and adaptogens to their flagship gut support product. They've got these great new vital immunity packets that are perfect to take when you're feeling sick or proactively as an immunity boost. They're made with elderberry, NAC, licorice root, astragalus, and ashwagandha, and they fire up the immune system to help you bounce back quicker. Now, heads up, for a limited time, you can get over to lukestory.com/ion, that's ION, for an exclusive discount. Apply the code Luke20 and save 20% site-wide, including the new ION Plus line. Oh, and if you want to turn your brain on, I highly recommend you check out their Focused Mind Packet for concentration and creativity, and also their Restful Sleep Packet for the most refreshed mornings of your life. Again, that link is lukestory.com/ion, and your code is Luke20 for 20% off. Another thought that I had was, I wonder how many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people have had deep psychedelic experiences while listening to your music. Must be, not that everyone that listens to your music is participating in that mode of travel, but a lot are. I know I have. So interesting to think, like, the voice that was just playing right here has been in the field of so many beautiful souls as they're awakening. Do you ever trip on that?
I sit with that. I feel that. I've had folks come up to me and tell me, we put your music on when we were giving birth to our child. We put your music on when my father was passing away. We put your music on, in the midst of the pandemic when we were terrified and didn't know what was going to happen on this planet. And I've had those reflections at different moments. And it's like, so I always feel this thread in my heart, you know, of like connection, just like this connection wherever I am, that, you know, in any given moment, there's many in our collective field, you know, of human family that are, we're connected to each other, you know, we're woven together in this beautiful fabric of life. You know, I really feel that, like the strings of the ngoni here, it's like all of us, we're these strings. Our life is a string that is being played by the winds, if you will, of time and our ancestors. And we came here to bring through a song. All of us have a song of our heart that some of us have already found, and it's playing strongly, and that's our dharma that gets us up every morning. And some of us have yet to discover it. And some of us have too much scar tissue, perhaps, that's layered on, where we've have a hard time accessing it. And so every time I ever play, whenever I perform, whenever, you know, in the recordings, and you could say the form of parenting, I haven't had the honor yet to give birth to a you know, a human child yet, but I have given birth to a lot of musical babies, if you will, you know. And so there's this form of fathering I've been able to enjoy, and like how to put them into the world in a really good way, you know, without it becoming, I guess, yeah, corrupted, for lack of a better word, you know, distorted by, you know, the powers of the music industry and kind of that whole system, as I think you know, because you used to live, I know, in LA and in that entertainment capital of the world. Yeah. And so it's been a real journey to stay independent and to protect these babies, so that I know they can get out there to the world, you know, in a good way, and connect and resonate the hearts of others, to then remember their own song. Because in the end, that's really, for me, that's the mission. It's like helping us to feel more connected to ourselves, more connected to the earth, more connected to one another. Because by doing so, very much like we were talking about earlier, off camera, you know, it brings us back to that love that then really is the source of the world we know is possible.
Epic. Do you ever get the sense that in prior lives, if you believe in such things, I'm just going to assume that you do in your own way. Have you ever got the sense that you were also a musician before?
Yeah.
Before you came here this time?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a few times. Yeah.
I find it interesting to observe virtuosos, especially those that start really young. And I just think, there's no way they just got that this time around, you know? Sometimes you see young kids just shredding on whatever instrument. I go, there's just no way that isn't some training from the last time they were here or something like that. And I guess, you know, sometimes in the family lineage, right, the DNA wisdom or the DNA skill for something probably comes through too. It's very common that if somebody's really musically gifted, there's a number of people in their family that are musical too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always think about that. Like, wow, how many times has this cat sat in front of a fire and played a drum or strummed some kind of instrument or something, right?
Totally.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, no, I feel that. You know, both my parents were musicians, and you know, they always laugh about retelling kind of me as a kid. They'd say, you know, because they'd have rehearsal, or they'd be doing a gig, and they'd, you know, get me up there. They'd give me like the maracas, you know, like the shakers, and we'd be playing, and they couldn't get me off the stage because I just wanted to stay up there and jam.
Really?
Yeah, they'd have a real hard time like getting it.
I was going to ask you what your first instrument was. Would it have been maracas?
I think maracas probably was one of the first ones. Yeah, for sure. Probably, you know, it's like they say in Brazil, you know, the greatest mestres, you know, in like the samba schools, you know, it's like you start with the chocalho, or like, you know, maraca, basically a shaker. You start with the shaker, and then you end with the shaker. It's kind of like the black belt, you know. You look in the back of like this epic, you know, hundreds of drummers playing super precise, and in the back you see the master, just like he's an elder, but he's just holding down the shaker. But every nuance of the way that he's playing that shaker, the swing, every subtle motion of all the muscles in his body has all the information that then is coded into all the instruments, you know.
Totally.
And so it's just all right there in that shaker. So if you can play a good shaker, you can sit in with anyone.
You know, that's funny. That reminds me of when I was probably in my late teens and grew up listening to Led Zeppelin and the Stones and all those bands. And then I started to learn about blues, like the music that they borrowed from, or in some cases stole from. To create that music, depending on how you look at it. But I started then going and buying, you know, Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Bo Diddley and James Brown and all these like the original artists. And one of the interesting things about early kind of 50s rock and roll was Bo Diddley. And when you start to, and there's the famous Bo Diddley beat, like pop,
Dun,
pop,
dun,
pop,
dun, 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 dun.
yeah,
Yeah.
which later is like a George Michael song. You know, it's like there's a lot of songs. There's a famous U2 song that's got that beat. There's a few. Once you know the beat, you're like, oh yeah, I know that.
Do you know where that beat comes from?
No, you know?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh no way.
So that is clave in
okay.
Afro, Cuban music, Afro-Caribbean music. We call that clave. Clave is essentially the instrument you play with the two sticks. You'll often see in like a salsa band, for instance, is more commonly, and they'll have these two kind of clack sticks, and you play them against each other.
Yeah.
And they'll be,
yeah.
So that pattern is clave also translates to like llave, like the key. So it's actually that pattern originates all the way back from Mama Africa. It's a very ancient pattern, and there's some people say that there's only one clave, but there you hear it in different voicings and applied in different ways. But that pattern is like the key, if you will. It's like the DNA code that holds together this whole universe of rhythms and feeling of music that translates a feeling, and it's the timekeeper. It literally keeps like the time, and it gives you the feel and the swing of the music. And so in salsa music, for instance, you'll either hear it what they call a 3-2 or 2-3 clave. In other words, you'll start with like the Bo Diddley, that's 3-2. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, ba da dun 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 dun, right? 1 dun dun. But you could flip it. So start with the 1 da da. Ba, 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 ba,
cool.
ba, ba. And that's like often in salsa, you'll hear that clave.
Right.
So like the son clave. And so these claves, these keys, and we have them in Brazil too, but we don't call it clave in Brazil. In Portuguese, but it's the code. You'll hear it all over, like samba and all the different rhythms and Afro-Brazilian rhythms. That clave, it has this code. It is a key that will unlock the music. And when you understand it, it's the one part of all the band that tells everyone where you are in the music, because often the music doesn't all line up on a one. It actually it's all polyrhythmic. It all interlocks, right? And it's very by design. I like to say, you know a people when you know their music and their food and their language. There's like the three portals, right? And I guess when you say music, I also mean dance, right? So also the dance moves, right? But the music particularly, because the language you have to spend a lot of time studying. The food you can get right away, you can get the flavor, right? But the music, when you start to tap into the music, you'll suddenly find, and this has been my experience, I don't know if you maybe can relate to this, it's like you'll understand the cosmovision of a people through the lens of their music. Great example, when you listen to African music, you'll often hear many parts. It's very polyrhythmic. So meaning there's many parts that interlock with each other. There's many rhythms, polyrhythmic music. And of course, all of the African diaspora from North America to South America, we hear this polyrhythmic music. And so it's no coincidence, or at least I get curious, that they are polytheistic. They believe in many gods. They believe in animism. There's spirit in everything. Whereas when you go to, say, the Middle East, and you listen to the rhythms of the Middle East, they're not polyrhythmic, they're monorhythmic. Everyone's playing basically the same pattern. They might translate on different instruments, but they're all playing the same part. There's not interlocking parts, which is curious when you think about all the great monotheistic religions of the world, right? Judaism, Christianity, all originate from those places, often desert regions, not forested, very, barren terrains. So they reflect the environment, they reflect the music, they reflect their spirit and how they see and interpret the world. And so I offer that because it's pretty
trip.
It's profound.
So
right?
what about something like Gregorian chants or classical music?
Yeah,
like Renaissance classical music. How does that reflect that?
Not polyrhythmic.
Okay.
Definitely not polyrhythmic. They're coming from that
mono.
Yeah,
that's so interesting.
It has one kind of main pulse that's carrying the whole thing, but the parts. I mean, there may be parts that that will interlock on some level. Let's say it's complete devoid of some form of polyrhythm.
Yeah.
But it's not. It isn't built by polyrhythm. Like that's not the engine room, if you will.
Right.
Whereas when you listen to African music or Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Caribbean, Cuban, music, jazz, even in the United States, all that swing, all that's coming from Louisiana, all those roots music is all coming from ancestral African music. And so you hear that polyrhythmic foundation to it, which makes it go. And so a lot of rock, a lot of the popular music styles that then were birthed out of that, they all took from that. electronic music. You listen to most electronic music nowadays, and I promise you, I hear all the time plagiarism of taking various patterns out of from traditional Afro diaspora music. So that's not a coincidence. It's because that music will take you into trance. It's by design. So that Bo Diddley, right? That dun 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 dun. It has something that propels you into the next measure. It propels you. It moves your body in a way that you can't fully comprehend.
Right. There's like an entrainment to it.
100%. Yeah. And it trances you. And so it's translating you. It's transforming you. It's taking you across the barrier, right, of like normal waking state into, the other realms, the trance states. And that's healing fundamentally. So we feel that in our body. We can't cognize it completely, but you feel it. And that's where, like I said, music even transcends language. It becomes that universal language because it's embodied experience. You feel it or you don't feel it. It either grooves or it doesn't groove. And you know right away. It's like, this is really
that is super interesting. And I'm going to be vulnerable here. I've never been able to dance. Like I'm not inspired to do it. If I've ever tried to do it, I feel like I'm forcing it and it's like fake. I don't feel like doing it. It's like a part of the human expression I've never understood. Even when I watch people dance, I'm kind of just like, I don't get it. It's a weird thing I have, especially as someone who loves music so deeply and plays a bit of music. However, that said, if you put on James Brown 70s music, I don't know if I'll dance, but I would have a very hard time sitting still. Something's going to be moving, right? And it's like, I guess I never thought about it, but like the polyrhythms, right? There's so many different kind of, not time signatures, but just kind of almost such complex rhythms going on to the point if you break it apart. In fact, I used to have, when I was a bass player, I really wanted to learn how to play funk bass. And you could buy this CD set that was like James Brown rhythm section. Ooh. And it was super cool because you could pan left and right and isolate the bass and the drums. And if you just listen to like the deepest funk James Brown cuts on the drums, when you isolate the drums, it's so simple. It's like, that's the thing that makes me move. But then when you put the bass line in there, you're like, okay, now we're doing something. Yeah. And then you have the contrast of the two or even three rhythm guitars that are like kind of weaving off one another, playing totally different rhythms. And all of a sudden when you start adding it all together, you're like, oh, this is James Brown funk.
There it is.
But if you tear it apart, it's very simple. It's really interesting, just rhythmically.
Now think of that metaphor for the way that we, because I know you're in the, you kind of study supplements and different things like that, right? So like, think about how much we do this in the West. We isolate things, right? Right. We take it out of the intelligence of the whole. And because we're like, oh, I just want the one thing. So it must be just the drum. That's the thing that's is the real thing right here. It's just the bass line or it's just the vocalist. And so we take something out and then we think, oh, let me 10x that, concentrate it, now give it to you. Now you've got, that funky feeling now, right? Like the potent funk. But in fact, it's lost it, right? We've taken it out of its intelligence of the whole. And so I find it fascinating to look at the metaphor of music when we even think about wellness and healing as a whole, right? It's like, you really can't, you need the whole. Mm-hmm. The whole is where the magic is. It's the interaction of all the parts combined and having their right place in the wheel that creates the magic that actually transports us and heals us and makes us more whole. Literally, wholeness, wellness is what we're talking about. And yet we keep isolating, keep going back to this kind of reductionist model, allopathic kind of model of let's isolate the thing and we're missing the whole picture. And it's like the fundamental piece why the music of life is getting squished and turned into the homogeneity, right? And the monocrops of like Big Ag and all of this, right? It's such a metaphor for the whole thing. So like,
there's a lot of modern music that's monocrop music, like one dimensional.
There's a parameter in the DAWs, the digital audio workstations, like the software that people use to make, modern day music, to record, especially electronic music, because so much electronic music has now become mainstream. And it's called Humanize. There's literally a knob. You have to turn it. If you just put something down on the grid, it's just going to be, you know, like perfect, you know, like a metronome. And then you have to turn the humanized knob to be able to add the imperfection and the swing and the feel back into it. Basically
Really?
to move things on the grid so it's not so precision. So that it feels actually...
That's interesting. So
it's called humanized.
Can you use the humanized knob to say like create a backbeat where it's like
Totally.
dragging a little bit?
Yes.
Oh, really?
That's how electronic producers have to do it.
Really?
I mean, unless they're really good and they're playing it live and actually make it. But yeah.
That's so interesting. That's one of the things I've observed in drummers. James Brown, he said a bunch of different drummers too, I can't name, but you think about that, it's like, it's right on time, but if you kind of isolate the drums, it's behind. It's like lagging just behind a millisecond, yes. Right? And that's what gives it that tension. Yeah. Gives it that tension because everyone's not right on the same beat.
Yeah. And it breathes.
Yeah. In fact, Keith Richards, who's probably my all-time favorite, like secular musician, talked about why the Stones would swing so much. And he said that it's because he would create the rhythmic landscape with his rhythm guitar. Charlie Watts, the drummer, would be following him. And then the bassist, Bill Wyman, would be following the drummer. Right? This is not always the way. A lot of times it's like you have like a very solid drummer and everyone's kind of following that, right? And he said that's what gave it that sort of buoyancy and that loose, like kind of beautifully sloppy sound, you know, when they would play live. It's like, if you were like a really uptight musician, you'd be like, oh, they suck live. To everyone else, they're just like, this is the best rock and roll ever. Right. Because there's kind of like a danger in it. There's a spontaneity, you know, it feels like it's about to fall apart at times. And it's like, it makes you feel like you're seeing something for the first time, even if it's like Satisfaction for the millionth time they've played it since 1965 or whatever, right? But I always thought that was interesting, just how the timing can just be out of phase just ever so slightly, and it creates a completely different audio landscape. All right, the thing I was trying to get to was, because you were mentioning maracas.
Yeah.
And when I first got really into Bo Diddley, I realized that part of what made his music groove so hard was their maraca player, Jerome. And he would play like, I don't know, 4 maracas in each hand or something crazy. And they put it really high in the mix. I mean, it's like really prominent. Once you know to look for it, you're like, holy shit, this is like a whole maraca track.
Maraca
right?
forward.
Yeah. And then he even made a song, Bring It to Jerome. And Jerome Green was his name. And he was like a really famous badass maraca player. And it's just funny because you don't think of that instrument as like having, I don't know, virtuoso capacity.
Oh yeah, no,
but that's what really made Bo Diddley's music. That and like the tremolo guitar, you know, there's all this wah, 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 happening, and then the maracas. It's just magical. Well, it's winter again, folks. That means there's less sun to be had and less time spent outdoors getting that blood moving. Now, for a lot of people, this can lead to depression. I know it can for me. And it makes sense when you realize that sunlight switches on serotonin and hormones like endorphins too. I'm guessing by now that most listeners know that along with breathwork and ice baths, sauna therapy is on my top 3 list of health hacks. I do them just about every day, and especially during the long, dreary winter months where getting the right wavelengths of light and a good sweat is key to my mental and physical well-being. So when I can't get enough sunlight outside, I bring the sunlight in with my Amplify Full Spectrum Sauna by Sunlighten. Research shows that infrared saunas can have a positive effect on mood, helping to alleviate depression and anxiety. And regular sessions can also lower cortisol levels, reducing stress and increasing mental clarity and focus. There's a ton of science on infrared therapy, but I also go by how I feel. And when I step out of my Sunlighten, I always feel super chill and ready to tackle what's next. So bring the healing powers of infrared light into your home with the highest quantity and quality of infrared available. Visit get.sunlighten.com/LukeStory and use the code LukeStory to save up to $600. Oh, and also check out the Lifestylist episode 477 with Sunlighten co-founder Connie Zach. With 25 years optimizing the sauna game, non-toxic materials, and barely detectable levels of EMF, Sunlighten is absolutely the way to go. That's get.sunlighten.com/LukeStory, and don't forget that code LukeStory to save up to $600. How many instruments do you play at this point?
How many
Or
instruments
can you even count?
Um, one instrument.
What is that? The human?
I play one instrument
You
well.
play Poranguí.
That's it. And then everything else is an extension of the one instrument.
Wow.
That's kind of been my journey with it. So it's like, for me, it's always coming back to cultivating my mastery of this instrument. And the deeper I'm connected and embodied, then I can pick up anything and make music. You know, whatever I can play becomes then a musical opportunity, you know, to create something with, you know.
When you play live,
Yeah.
which I've only seen you once live, it was out at the Vanderbeeks, and it was, aside from just the great soundscape, it was really interesting to watch you. And it was totally unpredictable the way that you're just grabbing all these different instruments, and it seemed to be, to me, extremely spontaneous and just kind of made up as you went along.
Totally improvised.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I wasn't just, you weren't faking the spontaneous nature of it.
No.
I was like, I don't think this is a set list. It's just like, he's just grabbing stuff. And then there's like some kind of backing tracks going on at the same time.
No backing tracks.
No, that's all you?
That was all me.
Are you even like playing loops or anything?
I'm looping.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
I use a looper, a pretty crazy looper device.
Okay,
that
so that's what it was. All right, because I see like something would start and now there's a beat and then you're like.
So I'm kind of like a painter, like a live painter. I'm painting with sound and with the audience. So I'm responding to what's alive in the space, seen and unseen, the spirit in the room, your ancestors. Like I'm listening to all of that. And in that listening, again, the instrument, then I'm using the instrument to like, how do I bring that into form? How do I bring the formless into form? And so it's storytelling in the moment. And that's the magic of it for me. You know, I don't want to play something that is dead, that's a track from another moment. Like, how do I create that in the now and capture the magic of even your breathing in the room? You know, and that's in the recording of that loop. And so I'm able to take that. Yes, I'm recording in the moment, but it's totally contextualized to like what is happening right then and there. And that's the magic of it for me. It's like really, really, and like that's what tells me what to do next. Because as I respond to each of the things that are arising and what's alive in the space and where we are as living, breathing organisms, then I'm able to respond to that and answer the question. And then comes, the answer, and then comes another question. And so it's this beautiful dialogue in a way. Essentially, it's like our conversation here, where we get to really create something that's so poignant and essential to that moment that needs to be expressed so that we can feel more whole. Back to kind of what we were saying in the beginning, it's like my goal is to leave everyone feeling more beautiful and connected and alive than when they walked in the space.
Do you ever have a situation in which you're led through your intuition and creativity down a certain path and you feel the audience not resonating with it? Like kind of like how a comedian will sort of bomb on a joke. Do you ever experience like a song in one of your performances like not land?
Different degrees of that. It's like, because when you're doing this, it's like there's so many layers to this, but one of the important ones I find is like I'm offering my nervous system. I'm entraining a space to my nervous system. I'm offering a pattern. I'm offering a state of being. And so if I'm not coherent and I'm not in a rooted, grounded place, like we had a really rough sound check and it was a really rough day travel, it takes a lot more, I have to work to really bring myself. I've gotten pretty good at this. So even when we do have hectic, like, oh man, the technology is failing, all the things are going awry. That's kind of been my mastery, self-mastery school is like, how do I stay centered? How do I bring that calm, depth, and connection to source through no matter what, even if all the tech fails? Like, how do I recover? How do I continue to meet the moment? And okay, the moment is it's all failing. Now what? And so for me, that's really been it. Like, great example is like, I played in Vision Festival, this big festival in Costa Rica. It's a big transformational, music festival that, has a lot of, it's very much like in the jungle, it's near Uvita, like we were talking about. And, I was 5 minutes, I was closing out the festival, main stage, I don't know, 10,000 people or so in the audience, prime time slot, closing it on Sunday night. And
that's a lot of people.
There's a lot of people in the jungle, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like full vibes and everybody was there. It was like the landing of the show, of the whole festival. And I'm playing And I probably had like 10 minutes left in my set. And all of a sudden, my whole rig goes out and it just no sound, nothing. The mic's dead, everything's dead. And I'm like, oh, great, okay. And I was like, they're like, they think it's part of the show or something. I'm like, this isn't part of the show.
A long drop beat.
A long drop beat. So I'm like, okay. So they fortunately had a wireless handheld that they were able to get to work. And so they brought it out to me. And I basically walked out there and just got the whole audience to then sing. We basically, I broke them up into sections and we all sang it out into the end and like brought this beautiful groove and this final song that ended up being the highlight of a lot of people's festival. That was like, man, the way able to turn that, what could be a failure, so to speak, in that moment. And instead of freezing and being like, in a freeze response, able to stay regulated and be like, oh, everyone came here to experience the prayer of what I'm here to bring through. And we all want to see the same thing. So now we have the power, even when the electronics all fail, it's actually us. We are the instrument. And so that was like one of those, moments where really what do they say? The tire meets the pavement kind of thing, So the rubber meets the road. So and it ended up being this really magical moment. And fortunately, they were on board because I'd already really won them over through the set leading up to that moment. So, in that moment, everyone was just
wasn't
ready.
The second song.
It wasn't the second song. It might have been harder. I don't know. But I've had sets, honestly, where it's been really challenging has been when there's a lot of alcohol in the field, when there's a lot of, to be really blunt, I think cocaine in the field. Those two substances in particular, when they're in the field, there's a density. It's almost like a wall. I can feel an energetic like wall where it's hard to traverse. It's really hard to reach across that invisible barrier, if you will. And I've had gigs like that too. And those are the ones where I really got to work because so much of what I do, to do what I do, it's about a co-creation with the audience. And so if I don't feel their nervous systems, like if I don't feel I'm sending out like the dolphin, the echolocation kind of ping, if it's not bouncing back and it's just absorbing it and just like into this amorphous like blob, it's really hard. It's really hard because then I have to generate it all myself. And I can do that, but I'm not like a DJ where I can just, hey, I'm going to push this track. And now, I know this track will do the thing. It's like I'm generating it all from scratch. And so those are the hardest ones. And I've had a couple moments in that. And, I pull some of my go-to, tools, if you will, and my arsenal, or be it like the didgeridoo, like the yadaki, is really good at cutting through dense energy. And so that's one instrument that I will often call upon. Sometimes I have a very large Tibetan prayer bowl that has traveled all over the world with me. And that thing also is as an instrument that sometimes I'll strike to like send out a real like ripple that'll help kind of like calling Ganesha and break apart, and fragment some of that density so that then I can then send the sweet, notes in to their hearts. And it's worked out, but it's sometimes a lot of work.
So if anyone's at one of his gigs and you hear one of those instruments, you've had too much to drink. No more trips to the beer garden. No, it's interesting that you bring that up because as I was telling you earlier when we were eating lunch, I quit drinking 27 years ago, not by virtue, just by necessity.
Yeah.
And so over that time, it's been really interesting to observe the contrast in energy if I go into a group of people, and not if there's just a little alcohol, but if people are like really partying.
Yeah.
It's not ever been that ever actually at all that I want to drink or something like that, or that I'm judgmental on those people because I was the biggest drunk ever. But I don't really, there's like a frequency. It's like if you tune a radio to a certain channel, alcohol is like a specific channel.
Yeah.
And it's just not one that I'm able to tune into very easily. And so I'll feel, I don't know, just not that at home, or it's just not that fun if people kind of pass a certain threshold of intoxication with that. And I don't know if I've been around people that I'm aware of that have been doing a bunch of coke. That would probably be even weirder for me. But yeah, it's funny. And even sometimes which again is pretty rare for me, but if I'm somewhere and people are like smoking a lot of cannabis too, I'm just kind of like, can't really tap in.
There's a fog.
Yeah.
It's like a fog.
Versus if I don't know, if I'm somewhere and people are drinking some wachuma tea or having, various levels of mushrooms or something, it's like, even if I'm not participating, I feel totally chill, and I'm still in that frequency. It's really interesting how different, mind altering substances do have their own unique sort of vibration.
Yeah, and they'll entrain us. They also entrain us, right, into these other states of consciousness, which, has, for lack of a better terminology, I've experienced it as density. There's just like, it's like you're kind of in a swamp, with some of them. Whereas with others, it's like you're on roller skates. Like things can just flow really quickly. And I really speak in terms of the consciousness. Like, where is our consciousness, right, at any given moment? What is our desired effect? A lot of times we drink in our society often to like numb things. We don't want to feel all the things, or maybe we have the reason like, I don't feel comfortable in social context. So when I have some drinks, I feel a little more inebriated, a little more easy. I can open up more and I'm not so inhibited, that kind of thing. However, it comes at a cost. It's like you may feel less inhibited, but you're also dulled. There's part of you that's kind of dull, and there's a density. And the more you drink, the more that dullness, that density will take on. And then suddenly it's like your motor response is slow, your consciousness, your thought process, the response is slowed down. And so musically, to meet that frequency, it's hard because it's like certain music can't quite doesn't really work with that. It's kind of like why, like, I think, with ganja, for instance, right? Reggae music pairs really well with ganja, right? It's like it has a slower, laid back. It's a little, the beat, like you were talking earlier, is just behind the downbeat, right? It intentionally drags a bit, creates this, has this nice bubble bounce, kind of thing happening that you can just slide right into, and pairs itself with that particular frequency of that medicine. Whereas, I'd say like cocaine, right? When people are doing that, it's very much like a very excited energy, which also has its density. It's an ego drug. I mean, it amplifies the ego, for better or for worse, right? Some people might say it's like super Ritalin or whatever, to you, how you use that. But it's the density that it creates is that you're so in your you. It's all about me. It's like hard to be actually, at least from my experience of it, and I've actually never done cocaine, so I can't really speak to it like from first person, other than I've been in contexts where it's around. And what I feel in those places is that everyone is really just in their own nexus of like, it's like almost like a narcissistic thing. It's like, so it's hard to connect, like truly authentically connect, because it's so much about, let me tell you how great I am, is kind of the experience I've seen in that, which is a trip.
That's really interesting. We used to joke back in the cocaine days about, let's do some blow and solve all the world's problems. It's like you have all these great ideas that the next day you're like, that was the worst idea ever, kind of thing. Or playing music. We used to record music. Oh man, we really nailed it. And then you listen to the playback the next day and you're like, that was total shit.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting in that way. So
in the contrast, just to say, because I think people get the wrong interpretation of coca, mama coca, right? In the form of, say, mambe, or just having the coca leaves, having the tea. Like, it's such a beautiful superfood. It's an incredible medicinal plant. It's such a beautiful teacher. Cocaine is really it's again, isolating the one thing,
right?
And then 100xing it. So you just have this one molecule, and it's actually, then it becomes poison, versus like actually something that's really holistic. If you could connect to the original plant, like the way the indigenous people would work with this plant. So just like want to name that, right, too, because I think
very true. Yeah,
it's not to demonize any one thing. Alcohol too has its right application, I think, where it can be medicinal, but it's so easy to go into down the wrong path, if you will, and not wrong or right. I don't even like those terminology, but more just like, it's a frequency, and so just tracking. Am I dependent on this frequency? Why am I going to this frequency? What's the deeper piece that I'm trying to fill? Perhaps an emptiness, perhaps pain that I'm not willing to look at in my body, that this is helping me mask and basically cope with, but not actually heal from.
Do you, when you go on tour, do you intentionally avoid festivals and events that are very alcohol driven as a result of having that experience of that density that's so much harder to break through?
It's a great question. I'd say we intentionally, and this has been, it's a point of challenge. I just, for lack of a better terminology, like, I think in my career, my team and, me and my partner and like my management, like, managers definitely have been like, no, you need to play these big festivals. You need to play these things. It's the only way you're going to, be successful. And yet we really do make a lot of effort to play non-alcoholic spaces. And so by doing that, for those who don't know, the music industry, and I say industry, little M, big I, is very much about, it's an alcohol business. Like, that's the main, at least above board, right? That's the main thing that they're selling. It's not sales, not ticket sales. The big money maker is alcohol. And so the current existing infrastructure around the United States and the rest of the world is venues make their money from alcohol sales. That's the main bread and butter. And so they want alcohol vendors. You look at who are the big sponsors at the major festivals, mainstream festivals, and they're all alcohol sponsors. And so that's the big money. And so the circuitry, when you work with booking agents and you work with, kind of like mainstream, the big talent buyers, they want to plug you into the existing circuitry of this, venues that they own, that have bars, and are like, that's their model. So you're just content. They're just plugging you into this existing machine. And then you go through the circuit, you play the exact tour routes that they've already are well, grooves in a record, well worn in, right? And so when you break from that mold, when you're trying to do this, like what we've been really trying to do, we've been total pioneers. It's like, it doesn't exist. So you have to be willing to really work with a lot of community event producers and community spaces, halls, churches, places that have not been music venues. So then you're dealing with, sound systems that are like, you have to teach them, this is actually the kind of sound and lighting that we need to pull this off. So it's honestly missionary work. A lot of times we're working with people, maybe in the ecstatic dance scene, people who, have like a community organization, maybe a nonprofit, and we partner with them to be like, hey, this is how we can bring up level the production. And so that you can actually meet the needs to create a show that has a high production value, without being a real pro venue. So it's a lot of extra work. It takes all this extra effort. However, the reward is unreal, because what happens is that as we do this in various communities across the United States and beyond, is that then they up level. So now another artist who wants to do the same thing can plug into this like new emerging essentially circuit of, non-alcohol kind of venues and spaces and organizations that then are being enriched and empowered. And it's creating, and this is what I'm seeing, in our experience traveling the world doing this work, is that now there is a whole new wave of people who are really finding ways to drop into movement, sound, dance, community, sober, and I mean sober primarily without alcohol is the main thing, I would say. There's definitely psychedelics still in the space. I don't think those have gone away necessarily, but there's overall, I think, a real intentionality to these kind of experiences. And then bringing other drinks like cacao, elixirs, other kinds of, superfood based, say, elixir drinks that help us feel more alive and awake and connected. And so what I see and witness is that on the dance floor, folks are leaving these experiences feeling more healed, more whole. And so in this way, it is like a wave of healing that I'm very mission driven. Like, that's why I do this. It's not to play, get super famous and super rich. I mean, if those things come, then awesome, that's great. But I'm showing up, and I've been in this for a long time already, because my dharma is to be able to feel the coherence in the field of humanity, to be re-inspired to be a human being on earth. When I look out into the audience and I see people who are like in tears, goosebumped, heart open, feeling expanded, and they didn't have a drink, they didn't have any drug, they actually realized, and they have the epiphany, and people come to me, they'll be like, I felt like I drank ayahuasca, but I didn't have anything. But somehow the music actually took me there, the dance took me there. And when I hear that, that's like, man, that's fuel in my tank that helps me to really get up the next day and go do it again.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I like this idea too of, if you're dealing with an antiquated system, right? As you said, the music industry, capital I, that's funny. Oh man, it's so true. But rather than, whining and complaining about the way it is, or fighting against it, or trying to change it, it's like, cool, you guys just do your thing over here. We're building our own thing.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
like
both ends.
Parallel systems. And then, I don't know, there's just such more productive energy in that, right? No one has to be wrong. You're just like, cool, this is a matter of preference. And you trust that there's a demographic of people that also have that preference, that want a more rich experience. And then the people that are doing just going to a concert to numb out and just become unconscious, great. That serves its purpose too, if that's what you're into.
If that's what you need, I don't want to say don't do that.
Yeah, that's what I needed for a long time in my life,
until you were ready.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's just a moment, and that's the end of the thing. It's like, we need to build it, because if we just default to the existing structure, it's just feeding the same machine that is going to, it's by design going to create more of the same, and I'm not to, I'm not putting anybody down or anything like that, like ever. Like for me, it's just witnessing. In my experience, it's like, Okay, and I've chosen sobriety largely because I'm on a spiritual path. I follow something called the Red Road, which is, it's no dogma. There's no theology. There's no church or anything like that. It's actually an indigenous way of praying and being. A lot of it comes from the Lakota tradition and the Sioux Lakota people. My particular elders that we sit with are Dene Navajo up in Arizona. But I've chosen that path to be a sun dancer and to carry a lot of these ceremonies like the Inipi Lodge, the Temascal, or the Sweat Lodge, like you experienced with Bobby. And for me, that's been a massive, undertaking to follow that road. It's a really hard road, but one of the things you are asked to do is to choose sobriety, is to not drink, specifically alcohol. I mean, for various reasons. The least of not which is many of our indigenous relatives do not have even the genetics to be able to process alcohol, right? So instant alcoholism, right? It's by design, so to speak. It really results in major detrimental forms of, kind of a suicide, genocide energy with the whole people, which generationally has been a large source of trauma amongst our indigenous relatives, in Turtle Island, the United States and other parts of the Americas and beyond. Yeah. So we want to bring that, so for me, it was like, once I chose that, I had to kind of choose to let go of any drinking. I was never fully alcoholic or anything, but I'd enjoy a beer, I'd enjoy some wine. But since doing that, and I'm 8 years into that road, fully renouncing that for myself, man, I feel so much more turned on and connected and alive. And it's made me actually look at those patterns, the habitual patterns when I would drink, in kind of the context of the friends I would have that would kind of be like, oh, I want to drink to socialize, because that was the social medium. And it made me examine that for myself. And a lot of those friendships ended and kind of dissolved. Like, it just wasn't a frequency, a vibrational match anymore. And it's so interesting. And then, other friends came into my life that then opened up other doors, and where I feel much more depth and connection and richness in the conversation and the empathy I share with them, that we can talk about traumatic things, for instance, whereas like my conversations, maybe when we're around drinking, it wouldn't go there. It'd kind of stay, there just wasn't a depth that it would be able to seep down into. And again, not like it's good or bad or right or wrong. It's just they're different frequencies. And so just like there's all the frequencies of the colors of the rainbow, there's all the frequencies, right, in music. It's like, what is it that we want to entrain to? Because those experiences, those environments, a bar, say, a club, you walk into those environments, unless you are like a master, we're talking like Buddha level master, right? Jesus level master, you're going to probably entrain to whatever is the strongest thing in your environment. So if the strongest thing in the environment is this like 120 BPM, pounding you, your heart rate, if you check your vitals, you're going to start to you're going to be in training to that.
You just described my worst nightmare. Oh my God. It's just funny though, right? You go through different stages in life. I mean, when I was a kid and just completely wasted and playing rock and roll in clubs, I mean, I was in heaven because I was in that frequency, right? Yeah. And now it's like, oh my God, I don't even think I could watch much electric music. You know what I mean? It's like a singer-songwriter is like about my pace. Someone playing a drum or like the music you just played, I'm like, yeah, I can vibe with this. It's like kind of quiet and mellow and just different phases of life. But yeah, I think that's an important part of it. Is it's not, you don't have to make anything wrong. It's just like what's right for you at that particular time in your journey,
And it may change, and it will change. I think that's the one for sure thing, is like it's all going to change.
It's funny though, you mentioned reggae, and when East Forest was over here the other day, we were talking about, because he plays a lot of keyboard kind of instruments, right? I was like, do you play melodica? And he's like, yeah, of course. And I was like, have you ever heard Augustus Pablo, like famous Jamaican dub artist?
Yeah.
Who is like the Jimi Hendrix of melodica, and he never heard of him. So I was like, yes, I'm going to turn you on to like the dopest melodica music.
Excellent.
So after he left, I put on, just like a Spotify playlist of that music, and I cranked it up, and I was like, man, this is like the feeling I had when I was a kid when I would smoke weed. It's like, it is that frequency, but I didn't have to smoke weed to still be in the field.
There you go.
It's just like, oh, I can get that field just from that backbeat and the bass and the fucking delay on the melodica and on the snare drum, and it just has this trippy, specific sort of flavor to it.
Yeah.
And it will take me there if I want to go there. But the minute I turn it off, it's over. You know, I'm not laying in bed all paranoid 5 hours later going, when does it end? You know? So,
Yeah, you know, you hit on something really important with that. It's like the states of consciousness that a lot of different substances will take us to, different music will also take us to those states. And often you'll see them paired together, but you can actually reach those with just the music. That's why I say, like, you know, sometimes when I'm playing like an Icaro, say, that might come through in one of these, you know, improvisational channeled flows when I'm performing, that's where I'll have people be like, wow, I felt the plants. I felt, you know, abuelita, I felt grandmother. And so it's like, she's there. She's always there. Once we've imbibed in these, we work with Santa Maria, you know, ganja. Santa Maria is another name that we give her, you know, in Brazil. When we feel her, she has a frequency. And so when we connect to that through the music, and we can feel that in the music, that intelligence of the plants is always with us. And so we're like reactivating by resonating the water in our bodies, we can reach those states. And what I've come to find, and, you know, I studied neurosci back when I was an undergrad at Duke University. And I had a stint working in a neuroscience lab after I finished school. And it was a Brazilian led lab, Miguel Nicoleles, who's, you know, kind of a very renowned neuroscientist working with, you know, implants in the motor cortex. We had, you know, rhesus monkeys that had these implants, and they were moving like robotic prosthesis at MIT. At that time, that was in the early 2000s. That was like the cutting edge. All that tech is, of course, continued to evolve since that time. But when I was there, you know, a good friend of mine, his name is Siddhartha, and he was a capoeirista. We used to play capoeira together. And we would spend time with each other in these deep conversations. And he would explain to me, you know, it's like, we have all of this endogenously, all the things that all the plants do. The reason why the key lock works, right? That we actually have the effect that it has, whether it be, you know, ganja, whether it be, you know, mama coca, whether it be ayahuasca, you know, dimethyltryptamine, it's because we already make all these molecules. It's already here. And so music has the ability, if you will, like the clave that we spoke to in the beginning, to unlock this endogenous laboratory, if you will, within ourselves, which will take us into those frequencies and train into those frequencies ourselves. And I really, and this is something we used to talk about, Siddhartha and I, it's what happens, the next level medicine, which we haven't even gotten there yet. I think we're on the precipice with the whole psychedelic movement and more, is training our own nervous systems how to be able to access it. You know, whether maybe it's the cold plunge, maybe it's, you know, there's all these, I know in your field, in the biohacking world, it's like, ultimately, it's like, how do we reach those states with just what's built in? Kind of coming back to your first question, how many instruments do you play? You know, it's really the instrument. And so the mastery of our instrument then speaks to the depth and the richness of the music we create with our life, whether or not we call ourselves a musician.
Beautiful. I've been pretty much obsessed with the principles of quantum energy for years. Before any particle manifests physically, it exists as pure quantum energy, and that includes our bodies. And every person constantly interacts with other quantum energy fields. But things like EMF and toxic air, food, and water diminish our body's energy. And this, my friends, is why I use Lila Quantum products every day. Walk through my house and you'll see them everywhere, like the quantum block on our kitchen island, for example, which we use to charge our food, drink, and supplements to increase their nourishing potential. Lila Quantum develops and studies its quantum products to help mitigate harmful EMF effects, activate the body's self-healing powers, and strengthen our biofield. The pure quantum energy they use is also part of every cell. It's a form of source energy. It's natural and very real. And there's a long list of randomized, placebo-controlled, single and double-blind studies proving the many effects of Lila Quantum products. Lila Q products neutralize EMF, optimize HRV, and improve the blood. This has been shown in the various studies to which I referred, as you can see for yourself right on their website. To upgrade your life with Lila Quantum's pure quantum energy right now, visit LilaQ.com and get 10% off your first order with the code Luke10. That's LEELAQ, LilaQ.com. What was it like being a kid and being multicultural, spending time in Brazil, Mexico, Southwest US? How did all that happen? I find that interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to say, wow, it was so romantic and beautiful and amazing. It was tough, it was really tough. Um, and I say this because I had a pretty traumatic childhood. Um, went through a lot of difficult experiences because I never fit in anywhere. And when you're a kid, what do you want the most?
It's all that matters.
You just want to be accepted. You just want to fit
Yeah.
in. And I was like always the odd one out, right? Because I see, I'm pretty güerito, right? I'm pretty light skinned, and have kind of, I was the blondest in my family, right? They actually thought that my mom, like I was kidnapped maybe from another family, because my mom is dark skinned. She has green eyes, but she's morena, and my father is moreno. He's from Mexico, and my mother is from Brazil. But my father's father was actually from Oklahoma, from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he was Scotch Irish and Choctaw Indian. And so he had this mix, and his last name was McGrew. And so he had this, he was this big Irish Okie, he was in the military, and worked on the first radar. So he was very engineering mind kind of a person, but he spoke amazing Spanish. He spoke fluent Spanish. You see this big Okie guy, and then he started speaking in Spanish. You're like, what? So that's my family was a total paradox. I grew up with Spanish, Portuguese, and English, trilingual family. And I bounced back and forth. My folks, I was born in Brazil. And my father brought us back to the States, to Arizona, when I was little, but they ended up splitting when I turned 3. And unfortunately, it was just my mom hated the United States. She didn't like American culture. It was just like too intense for her. She really wanted to raise me in Mexico. And so she took off with me. And my dad, kind of the custody thing. And I ended up bouncing back and forth for a lot of my childhood. And until I finally stabilized kind of school in the United States, in Tucson, Arizona. I did some of my elementary schooling, and kids are cruel, man. When you have a name like Poranguí, I heard it all potential iterations of my name.
I just thought of one.
Yeah. I bet you heard a couple.
Not that creative, but I never thought about it until you mentioned it.
Go for it.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it?
Poranguí.
Oh, Poranguí was that was a classic. Yeah.
They never could do my name. The best they could do was Luke Puke.
Oh,
and I
Luke
always
Puke.
thought that's kind of cheating. It should be Luke Puke, right? Puke doesn't really rhyme with Luke, so I was never that offended. So I was like, it's lazy. And there's just
It's lazy.
Yeah.
It's lazy. Not that creative. Yeah. No, I got all of the names. And so the teachers often thought that, I was kind of always stuck in the back of the classroom. That was like, this kid's trouble. He's, because I was like, I think trying to compensate for all of that. I was very social, and I was always thinking, pretty creative kid. And so I was always coming up with things, and like, it was just too much. The teachers like didn't know what to do with me. And in fact, in 5th grade, this kind of school bully, he was really picking on this little girl whose mother was lesbian. And I really defended her, and I got into this whole fight with this kid, and I punched him pretty hard and got into this thing, and they pulled me out. They said, he's gonna amount to nothing. They had this whole like kind of counseling session with my dad at the time, and so I really I didn't fit in. And so my father ended up working he was in substance abuse. He's a substance abuse counselor actually, and worked and getting transferred to work at Adobe Prison, which is in a prison up in the Phoenix area, juvenile. And so he went up there, and so we moved to Phoenix, and I kind of got this opportunity where my grandparents, my father's father, the Okie I was telling you about, they needed help. They were kind of getting in their older years, and they already needed some support. And so they said, hey, why don't you stay here with us? Because my dad was going to move again, get transferred again. And they said, yeah, there's a school here. It was a Jesuit school, actually. And they said, why don't you, we'll help you go to the school. We can't afford the whole thing. It was an expensive school, but I had gotten a scholarship. And so they kind of covered the rest of it. And then in exchange, I would kind of help them, just take care of them at the house and stuff. And so that ended up being my high school years. And they gave me, for the first time in my life, they gave me the papers, like the application, like, just to apply for the school. And so, cause I had access to it, I changed my name. I didn't put Poranguí. I actually wrote, because my dad wanted to name me actually João when I was born, João Quetzalcoatl. And my mom spoke with a page, kind of a medicine woman, of a friend of ours, and she was like, "Don't name him that. That's too much karma to name after Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent." And so that's why my mom gave me the name Poranguí, which is a Tupi Guarani name. Poran meaning beauty, and Gui is like one who moves, so moving with beauty. And so I had this crazy name. So I had the papers, and I wrote Johnny McGrew, because my last name was McGrew, right? And so no one knew. I went to school, no one knew me. And so they just thought I was American, just Johnny McGrew, like a good old, like, kind kind of like no one even ever asked the question, like, where are you from or anything. And I basically shapeshifted. And my grades went from being failing, like marginalized in all of my grades up till then. And suddenly I graduated top of my class with full ride to Duke, you know,
Wow.
honestly, because I think people suddenly perceived me completely differently, which allowed me to then thrive in this environment in a way that I'd never been able to before, kind of like a new chance. And on my graduation, when they were calling the names, for the diploma, and they called my name. They had my full name on there, and they're like, Poranguí, and they called me up to the front, and I had, I kind of graduated top of my class, and I composed a song that I ended up playing for my whole student body as like a goodbye. And it was an all boys school. Brophy was a Jesuit all male school, and so I got to play this song that really spoke to my journey, if you will, of having to shapeshift, to be able to find myself again, and then reclaiming my name when I left there. And so it was just such a,
Wow.
experience of having to go
That's
through that
epic.
kind of metamorphosis,
Yeah.
and hero's journey of sorts, to be able to find myself again. And then of course my name has been a treasure for me ever since, but I had to really go through that and see how society really does, the way in which people perceive us, and then how that opens or closes doors to us. And so, it made me have to call upon a level of resiliency in myself that I'm grateful for till this day. So to your question, it was amazing. I'm grateful. I'd never changed anything about my childhood, but man, there was a lot of rough moments in there that now make me have the fortitude to, show up the way I show up in the world and be the leader that, I am. And I think through my music and through my healing path, that I don't think that I would have been able to do had I not had kind of the average child experiences that.
It's such an interesting rite of passage, like a long and convoluted rite of passage. More so than in some traditional cultures where it's a week or a weekend or a vision quest or something where you go from a boy to a man or a girl to a woman. That's like an extended,
It's extended.
Sounds very challenging. I don't feel so bad because I always felt like an alien as a kid and was always kind of different, didn't do well with my grades and was always in trouble. And, but I was like just a regular white kid amongst the rest of them, so I had no excuse. That sounds like a rough journey. One thing I've heard you talk about, which I think is really brave and really important, is the topic of circumcision, which is something I've covered pretty extensively on this podcast because I feel that it's, in this country specifically, is just, I'll just say it. I think it's an act of sexual violence, and I feel
mutilation.
I feel very strongly about just anatomical rights for all people, you know, and in this country, a lot of different theories on how it happened and why it happened. We don't need to go into those, but I'll just say I think it's a net negative for society and for the individual. And I can speak only from my own experience of having chosen to face that trauma and really kind of unpack it quite a bit. And, like you, I don't know if I'd do anything different because I am who I am, and everything that I went through, good or bad or ugly, has been part of the journey and has forged me into the man that I am, which I like most of the time. That said, I'll preface it by saying no shame to any parents who hold different beliefs and made choices that you might now regret. Every parent can do whatever they want to do. It's none of my business, but I will speak this to light. But what's interesting about your experience with it that you've talked about is that it happened for you much older.
Yeah.
And you're the only person I've ever known of or now know personally who had that experience after infancy. So if you're open to it, I'd love to kind of unpack that with you if you're willing to go there.
Yeah, I'm willing, of course. No, I think it's and thank you, because it's not a common one I speak to, but it's been a really, really profound form of, for lack of a better term, I look at it as a rites of passage, and truly it was, and there are very intentional rites of passage, in various cultures where there is mutilation involved, where there is, piercing or scarring of some form. So it's kind of a twisted one, to say the least, that I went through with this. But what had happened to me, my mother was really, in Brazil, because I was there, and my father was trying to get us to be able to come to the States because he wanted me to be born in North America, for all the reasons, just to make life easier, but he couldn't do it in time. And so I was born there, And in that process, my mother was able to then make the final call about, whether to circumcise me or not. Had my dad been present, he may have chosen for me just to be circumcised right then and there. He had gone through his own trial and tribulation with being circumcised. At the time when he was a little boy, they did it. I think he was a little bit older. He wasn't an infant. He was like 2 or 3, but they gave him a plum because they didn't have the anesthetics and like the local kind of painkillers that you have nowadays in the hospital. So he had a plum to suck on. So I know my dad also has a crazy story with when he was circumcised. So he just came from a place of, I never want my child to go through the pain that I went through, the difficulty I had. My mother was from the belief that, it's not necessary. We don't need to circumcise. That's like the mutilation. She already had that really clear. She was very holistic in her kind of outlooks. You could say my mom was very much a hippie, I guess, for lack of a better terminology. She was very much had run away from home at age 17 from a household of 8. Kind of a Brazilian family. My grandfather was cowboy, basically equivalent of a cowboy in Brazil, ran cattle in Minas Gerais. And my grandmother, was pretty hardcore, raising all the kids, kind of farm life. And my mother was the black sheep of the family. And so she was kind of like always rebellious and didn't vibe with all the kind of the default doctrines. And so she ran away from home early on, ended up joining a street theater troupe, was an activist, traveled all through Chile and Bolivia, Peru, and eventually made her way to Mexico, which she was part of a troupe that would do Paulo Freire's work, pedagogy of the oppressed. And so they really practiced like theater as a form of revolution. And so she was pretty deep in that world when she met my father. And so she was actually off touring. They were touring as a big Latin American troupe when she met my dad. So that's kind of just gives some context, like my mom's orientation. My father, was a Chicano, essentially would identify at that time as, very much Chicano, Mexican-American, born in Mexico, really raised in the Southwest, United States, and very much rooted in the culture and believer of culture being a lens to heal us and a way to the arts, especially being a means of how we can heal ourselves and kind of like connect to the authentic within ourselves, that society would kind of have us not kind of shun. And so he'd use the arts all the time, working with people with substance abuse, with gang violence. He would address that through hey, what happens when you give children some clay? What happens when you give them, some spray paint and like, hey, let's make a mural. Hey, let's paint this. Let's do this. Let's create masks and then talk about what are the masks we're hiding behind. So that's kind of, so that's kind of my folks,
Your parents were deep.
They're pretty deep people. I'm so grateful.
No wonder you didn't turn out to be a stockbroker or lawyer or something.
The irony is that they wanted me to be a doctor for sure, because I was the first in my family to go to an Ivy League, and I had this full ride. And so they were like, you're going to be a doctor, right? Because I'd always thought I'd do that. I was always called to the healing path.
You kind of are a doctor in your own way.
In a way, I still kept that.
Medicine man,
Yeah, in its own right. But so I didn't do that, and I started that path at Duke, but I quickly saw that the allopathic model just was fundamentally flawed. All due respect to all the medical doctors, and I have many friends who are MDs, and I've got friends who are NDs, and I've had I've looked at both those paths. But what I saw when I was in that model, and I shadowed in the intensive critical care unit for third degree burns at Duke Medical in pediatrics, so working with these kids flown in from all over the South with major burns. And, and I would work with these docs, and basically, they'd just look at the chart and they'd hand me the chart and they wouldn't even like acknowledge the child. And that really touched my soul in a way that I was just like, I'm going to spend how many years in school to do that? And I couldn't do it. And I thought that's why I got into neurosci. I thought, well, I'm really curious in this question of how does music and the mind, dance. I was already investigating this question when I was at Duke. And eventually that led me to see that, and then I found out, oh no, neuroscience is actually, you're in the business of sacrificing animals to the gods of science. Lots of animals. Like there's a whole zoo underneath, the neuroscience lab at Duke. I mean, so many horses, ferrets, monkeys, you name it, not just rats and mice. And they're all destined to die for a study that may or may not get published. It's a thing. So and I'm a vegetarian, I kind of grew up, again, kind of.
I learned that today when I said, what do you want for lunch?
Exactly.
I had to really think about it. I was like, oh man, salad with some salmon. Good. We're good. We're both happy.
Yeah. And so for me, it's like, it came down to the question. I mean, sorry, there's a lot of tangents here, but I feel I'll weave them back together. But it's, the question for me has always been, I want to be connected to where my nourishment comes from. It's like, so if I'm not willing to sacrifice an animal, have a relationship with that animal and kill it in a good way and then prepare it and then eat it, by honoring it and knowing it was honored, I don't feel comfortable outsourcing that work to someone else who likely, especially with industrial, farming practices, it's unethical for me. Like I wouldn't do it. How would I have someone else pay someone else to do that? So that's my own orientation. Of course, everyone, to each their own. And I do think it's worth asking the question for any human being, would you do it? Would you be willing to, to slaughter that animal and to prepare it,
I was a vegetarian for a very long time for that same reason.
That's kind of, yeah. And
it's a tough one to reconcile.
It's a tough one to reconcile.
Yeah. Eventually I went hunting just to have a closer relationship to that experience. And somehow that was, even though I didn't continue hunting, and it's probably not something I'll pick up as a hobby, but it gave me a little bit more broad understanding of that exchange of energy and life and the movement of energy in and out of bodies, you know, where I was kind of like, for me, it was like, I have to be willing to at least go there and have a tactile experience of that, or I would feel, I don't know, hypocritical or not fully facing, what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to your point, I have still thought about that a lot, because it's like, if I can go to a farmer's market here, shake the farmer's hand, ask them questions, I can gauge their level of openness and honesty and see what kind of reverence they have for the animals that they're raising and killing to make burgers for me. That would be my preference.
Yeah.
But it's not always convenient.
Right.
Like I'm having a bunch of friends over tomorrow and I'm like, oh man, I missed the farmer's market. So we're going to order something from the grocery store and it might say regenerative and this and that. But it's like, I haven't been to the farm. I haven't looked the farmer in the eye. So I don't really know the karma attached to that. Yeah. It's something to definitely ponder.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
No, thank you. And it's energetic, right? At the end of the day, it's like it's an energetic. You're imbibing in that. It's going to feed your body. The frequency of whatever did happen, whether we know it or not, is going to be in your body and is going to be ripple out from your body. Like it's just energy. In the end of the day, it's music. It's all vibration. And so I just, so at least invite everyone to at least have the inquiry rather than just defaulting to like the status quo and like, this is just what you do. I can't be bothered. It's Pink Floyd said it, we've become comfortably numb. It's his lyric catches it. It's like, it's inconvenient. And so this inconvenience, I invite us all to lean into it, because that's probably one of the biggest things I've learned from the Red Road and the indigenous ways of spiritual practices, is that most of the greatest medicine that we can harness as a human, as a leader, as a medicine person, for lack of a better term, the word shaman is kind of thrown around a lot, but ultimately it just means being a world bridger. And to be an effective world bridger, meaning one who can be able to be a messenger between the seen and unseen realms. In Quechua, they call it chakaruna. And so to be a chakaruna, to be that world bridger, which I very much feel has been a calling on my life, and I do that on stage, I do that off stage, you have to be willing to be in uncomfortable places. You have to be willing to go to the discomfort and to find the comfort in the discomfort, to find the peace. And it's in those places where we get tumbled like the rock in the river, where we actually become smooth and we actually have the depth and the richness and the ability, the fortitude to then be able to show up as leaders when things get really tough. And I don't think I could do that had I not been through those experiences. And that goes all the way from like the hardcore nature of like being a sun dancer, and going through that kind of ritual and of, sacrifice, all the way to the nuance of like, hey, just taking the extra time and effort to find out where my food's coming from. And am I connected to my food or not? And it's not convenient. And it's really hard when you're touring. I mean, gosh, super hard. You're traveling, you have a really tight schedule, so then trying to like eat really thoughtfully. And sometimes you can't, but it's like you still bring that intention and that care, you know, and we have a conversation, you know, it takes a little extra time.
Dude, you just reminded me of the one period in my life when I was touring with the band. We had like a little following in the UK, and I was a vegetarian at the time, and so we're, you know, on the road, on the freeways and everything, and it was actually really cool because the fast food joints like Burger King and stuff, this is back in the early 2000s, they would all have like, not like the gross veggie burgers, but they all sold these really good like black bean burgers. They were actually really tasty. So I'd be like, man, this is cool. I can go over there and eat like, I mean, it's still crappy fast food, but it was actually tasty and I didn't have to eat meat. So you'd either eat that or you'd eat Indian food. You know, that was it.
And the Indian food in England is amazing.
Yeah, amazing.
That's the bomb.
I stopped eating Indian food when I came back here because I was like, why did all the good Indian cooks move there? Like, it's weird. The Indian food in the UK is way better than you'll ever find, at least that I've ever found in the States. It's a strange phenomenon.
Pretty different.
I don't know if it's like, it's closer to India. Like what happened? I don't know. But yeah, you're reminding me of that, how challenging it can be to kind of follow a dietary regimen when you're on the move.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It takes a commitment. And so it's something we really do. We're thoughtful about where we're planning our tour route. And like we try to do that advanced planning. But again, it's like trying to have that connection. If we can, you know, to eat local, if we can to support farmers that are in the area, then you're always making that effort. And does require that extra care. And so all of that to come back to, you know, the journey of going through it, being 10 years old and getting circumcised was not easy. So basically I was at a place as a small boy, you know, where it's like I was having a trouble pulling back the foreskin. And my dad was really worried, you know, and so he took me to the doctor, normal kind of MD, general practitioner. And they basically were like, yeah, you know, you probably should just do it. Just get it cut because, you know, if he can't pull it back with ease right now, it's just going to probably get worse as he gets older, was kind of like the line that he fed my dad. And my dad being concerned at that time, it had been my mom. I was like, don't do it. You know, you'll be fine. It's going to correct itself. But my dad being worried because he didn't really have the education at that time to know. And he just knew that, gosh, I don't want him to have trouble with this later in life. And so from that place of concern, he agreed to, you know, to go through with it and basically asking me. I didn't know, you know, as a 10-year-old, all I knew is it was painful to have the doctor try to pull my foreskin back. And it wasn't pulling back easily. And so, you know, I didn't know. And so I was like, okay, I guess they're saying that this is going to make it work and be okay, you know, as a young boy. And so I agreed, you know, really not knowing what I was agreeing to. And so the surgery, when they did it, I remember they had me count back. It was strawberry flavored. I still remember it viscerally, like the whole experience, right? It had me, you know, inhale to take me under. And I was counting back from 100. I don't know, maybe I got to 95. And then the next thing I remember was the most horrible pain to this day. I can't describe it. It's ineffable. Like the level of pain that I felt in my body, it was off the scale. Like, and, you know, right here in my genitals, in the most sacred place of my body, you know, sacred organs of my body. And I woke up in a hallway on a stretcher, you know, like on a cart stretcher thing. No one was around. And this nurse came over and I'm like, God, I think I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. And this nurse comes to me, and God bless that nurse, wherever she is. Cause I think I said things to her that you shouldn't say ever. And I think I said that to her, and I unfortunately directed all of the horrible pain I was feeling in my body. And I don't know my vocabulary at age 10, but whatever I had in that lexicon of that age, she got the full brunt of it, unfortunately, because I didn't know. I was just like, you know, what is going on? And why? You know, just like feeling super violated in the deepest of ways. And so then they basically had stitches around, you know, the head of my penis, and had to take me back. And basically the doctor was like, you know, you can only take baths probably for the next like month or more, you know, until this gets to a good place where it's healing, the tissues are healing. And man, I had to miss school for a good chunk because I couldn't put any clothes on, even because having any clothing would obviously rub against it, the stitches, and it was just horrible. You know, sitting in a bath, just getting into the water, anything, touching it at all, it just was super painful. It was like someone sticking a knife, you know, in your genitals. So I mean, you can't like, it's unreal. Like I don't have language to describe what that was like. But then the aftermath, as it got better, was that the word got out. You remember that bully I told you about earlier? The one that I got in a fight with? He found out that I
Oh,
had had a circumcision. And so then it became like, he took it to task to like really try to shame me and embarrass me at school,
oh
for having
man.
gone through this really horrible experience. So for me, it was just a real lesson in all the ways, just how cruel, children can be in that way. And just really, again, having to find the fortitude. Because for me, I think one of the core wounds that I deal with is, and that became then a strong suit for me, is that I'm all alone. And so it kind of like, then kind of the counter to that was like, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. It was kind of like these two little, kind of like, archetypes, if you will. So it was like this resilience that I had, that I cultivated as a young child, having to like, I have to do it. I have to make it happen. If it's going to be, I have got to make it happen. Which was a superpower as a child. Of course, it's got me in a lot of trouble as an adult, especially in my relationships, with my beloved, you know what I mean? And just kind of with others, not allowing people to get close to me, and especially to my heart, because it's like, I'm not sure if I can trust it. You know, and so this has been part of my inner work that I'm, ongoing work in progress. But that's one of the pieces, was really learning how to be able to love myself and have compassion for myself, and being able to give myself that love and acceptance, and to be able to really look at the shame and then release it. Say, you know what, this isn't mine. This is like that 10-year-old in me. I'm able now to take him and take him in, and love him and show him, compassion. And it's crazy. And I still have stitch marks, on my penis from that suture line that I was hit with, at a 10-year-old, and it's, fortunately everything works great, but it's like, it's that reminder,
Oh, I
it's that
know.
reminder.
I know.
And so when I think about babies who don't have a choice, have zero ability to speak for themselves, and to have that happen right there off the bat, and to think that, oh, they don't feel it, this is better to get it over with now. It's like, man, that just, I can tell you, it's horrible. And I know in my bones, and in my groin, in my genitals, that is leaving an imprint of violent perpetration at the onset of life. And so when we then think about, as men in our society who've been circumcised, when you are coming from to life, and to the feminine and to the masculine, and showing up in life already from a place of deep core wounding that you don't even remember, but your body does,
Yeah.
how does that color the way that we show up then as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as, as teachers, as police officers, as you name it, politicians? How does that always function at this level of the root, right? Where we are coming from a place of already being violated. And then how does that then show up in distorted ways, in the way then we show up with the feminine in all of it, her forms, right? Whether she be, identify as male or non, or in all these different forms. How does that show up in how we make policy, and how we treat the greatest feminine of all, our Mother Earth? And so why I think, and I suspect, why it's so easy to see the earth as just a resource to be taken from, to be raped, to be stripped of, we can just feel okay with that, because at the core, we were essentially violated right out the gates.
Yeah. I often say, if you want a society filled with men with more sensitivity, it might make sense to not chop off the most sensitive part of their body. How the
100%.
masculine, we can be so calloused and unfeeling, and lack empathy, lack compassion, and just sort of charge through life, mowing over anything in our way. I think it has a lot to do with that, personally, in this country. It's like, it's just a travesty. So I appreciate you sharing that. These
Yeah.
things are vulnerable, and even for me, I mean, I've done a lot of healing around that, and it's still not something I'm super comfortable talking about. But I guarantee you, I don't know this, but I suspect with pretty high degree of certainty that at least one baby boy whose parents heard this podcast
Mm,
will live his life in the body that God gave him.
mm,
Maybe even more.
yeah. Wow.
A few tens
Cool.
of thousands of people are going to hear this conversation. And again, no shame to parents. This isn't like
No.
about a guilt trip. It's just,
Many don't even know.
it's a change in perspective. Okay, we've been looking at it this way from this side. Let's just move over across the room and look at it from over here and see what it looks like.
Right.
If it fits, if you like the view from that side, if it feels better in your heart, maybe make different decisions. And if not, then that's your karma, that's your journey, that's the kid's journey, and it was part of yours in a different way than it was part of mine. And I really honestly don't think I would have it any different because it's part of my gift, like all the pain that we go through, that we were able to persevere through and overcome and transmute into love. I mean, it's like, I don't know, if you don't have suffering, you don't have the experience of transmuting that into love.
Right.
You might have different ways of expressing love and cultivating love, and if you can take something really painful and dark and turn it into a gift, there's a lot of power in that.
So much. I mean,
so,
that's really it, right? It's that alchemical force.
Yeah.
That's that resiliency that I think is at the core of, like, one of our most redeeming qualities is two-leggeds, as human beings.
It's two-leggeds.
Yeah, the two-leggeds.
I like that.
Yeah, it's one of our most redeeming qualities, is that we can take poison and alchemize it into love, alchemize it into medicine. And I think that's something, we see that in nature, right? We see that in the serpent nation, the crawlers. Serpents know how to do this, right? Snakes know how to do that. King snakes can eat like a very venomous snake and transmute its poison. And in fact, the king snakes carry the anti-venom. That's like one of the best sources of anti-venom.
Do you ever get that hangry feeling? That unpleasant combination of hungry and pissed off that makes you less than fun to be around? Well, did you know that hangriness is actually a sign from your body's cells that they're hungry for something you're not getting from your diet? When your cells can't produce enough energy, they scream for you to double down on sugar and salt. And that can, of course, lead to weight gain, high blood pressure, and a grip of other unwanted outcomes. But the fuel your cells are actually craving comes from the very building blocks of nature, minerals. And one of the best ways to cover all your mineral needs is a 1-ounce shot of Beam Minerals. With every essential mineral your body needs, all in optimal ratios, Beam's full-spectrum formulas make it crazy simple to feed your cells and keep your mood on an even keel. And you owe it to yourself, and your loved ones for that matter, to smash hunger before it begins. So head over to beamminerals.com and use the code Luke to save 20% off. And Beam Minerals, by the way, not only help with your mood, they also boost cellular metabolism, enhance performance, and support your immune system. They can even lead to clearer thinking and better sleep. But don't believe me? Check it out for yourself. Hit up beamminerals.com, punch in the code Luke for 20% off your first order.
You just reminded me of one of the coolest things I ever saw in nature. It was in Lake Powell. Back, I was probably in my early 20s, and I came upon a king snake eating a bigger rattlesnake, just munching it whole. I was like, damn, king snakes are badass.
They're pretty badass.
Yeah, we used to catch them when I was a kid, the black and white striped ones, you know, and you were always paranoid it was going to be a coral snake. I don't think we had the poisonous version of it, but yeah, they're so beautiful. I love those snakes. How is your relationship with entheogens, plant medicine, psychedelics evolved over the years?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's been through a lot of different iterations. My father, and sorry, Dad, I hope this is okay. This is a vulnerable share, but like, my father was, he tells me this story. Both my mom, I mentioned they met in Mexico. So the place where they met is a very, very special place on the planet. And it's in the part of Mexico in Chiapas, in a place called Palenque, which is actually Mayan ruins there. Probably one of the oldest and most incredible Mayan cities that was swallowed by the jungle. Exists there. Only about 3% has been excavated. And my father was there at that time. He was actually, doing art at that time. He does leather burnings, where he'll burn into leather like these Mayan glyphs. He studied this, and he used to do this. He kind of brought this kind of back as like an art form to that area at that time, back in the 70s. And my dad was there working on this, and there's a mushroom that grows there, a psychedelic mushroom known as the San Isidro, which will grow there. It often, comes up a certain time of the year when the rains come. It'll grow in the cow pies. And so my dad at that time, he still tells me the stories, like how him and my mom met. He was in this place called Baños de la Reina, which were these queen's baths, these beautiful waterfalls, cascading waterfalls. The water there has travertine, so it kind of fossilizes things. Like if you left your toothbrush there for like a month, you'd come back and it'd be like stone. It's a really surreal water, magical place. And he was there, and he says, he had just taken some of these San Isidros, and he had a friend who was visiting him, and he said his buddy was sitting across the edge of the bank of this river, and these waterfalls, kind of cascading waterfalls. And he says, I was sitting there, and he says his buddy started to like point at the water right where he was standing on this big like stump. And my dad looked down. I think he said the mushrooms were just starting to kick in, and he says he was pointing there, and he looks down, and sure enough, there's this freaking snake, this water snake that was coming right towards him, right to where he was standing. And my dad says, I had this moment where I had to really feel into it. I was like feeling the medicine coming on. And he's like, do I confront the snake? Do I run away from the snake? Like, what is the right thing right now? Kind of feeling all these existential questions come up. And he thought, I need to get out of its way. I don't think I need to do that right now. So he gets up the waterfall. He climbs up the waterfall to the next pool, and he looks down, and this víbora went right into the stump. It was like its home. And my dad thought to himself, he's like, I wonder if a snake can crawl up a waterfall. He's kind of thinking to himself, and he's going through this whole process with the snake and his mortality. And he said, in that moment, he turned around, and my mother was bathing in the waterfall that he had just climbed into. And that's essentially how they met. And from there, essentially,
Wow.
as they, they became lovers not long after that. And they invoked me just, I don't know, a few days later. And so that's kind of how I came to be, thanks to these, in a way, the serpent we were just talking about, right? And these honguitos, these mushroom people, los niños, as they're called, which are the children. And I think that's significant, los niños, because they carry an innocence to them. Mushrooms, the mushroom nation, the mycelial network, right? Especially the psychedelic mushrooms, they have this innocence to them. They have this innocence into the energy that they carry and the frequency, and they bring us into a vibration with deep understanding, embodied knowing of rebirth and death and rebirth. And so they constantly connect us to that, right? Because they literally are born out of death. It's where they come from. And so they're the bridgers of this. And in fact, they're essential for all life to happen. And some even say, right, our nervous system, our brains themselves are kind of an evolution of this mycelial network. And so I feel a deep affinity to honguitos, to the mushroom people. And they were probably one of my first psychedelics that I ever imbibed in myself, which happened much later. I was pretty straight-laced going through school. I came from a family where there'd been a lot of addiction in my family, from some of my uncles and others in the family. I think that's probably when my dad went into substance abuse therapy, as a therapist. There's a lot of that. And so I'd kind of gotten the sense that, hey, you know what? I see this as a propensity in my family. I'm not going anywhere near it. So I stayed really clear of all substances. I didn't even smoke a cigarette. I've yet to smoke a cigarette. I've smoked tobacco ceremonially, but never smoked. And so I kind of had that orientation and deep respect. And I went into one crazy thing. I'll share briefly this little side story. Is like in high school, when I went to the Jesuit school, I, in Brazil, would go out dancing all the time. I loved dancing. Dancing was like my primary language to express myself. And when I came to the States, you had to be 21 or older to go out dancing, like, be clubs and bars and all these things, but like you couldn't go out and dance. And so I really struggled with this. And like even my aunt, my dad's younger sister, she would sneak me into the gay clubs because they were the only ones who would let me in. They'd be like, oh, he's cute. And they'd let me, they wouldn't card me. And so she gave me, but then of course, then she'd be playing like defense all night because, everyone would be trying to like, I was like fresh meat. And so this crazy experience, but I love dance music. Like I loved the trance that I would feel with it and being able to like just get into that dance. And I wouldn't drink or anything. I just loved dancing. And fortunately, I met a good friend who became an ally in high school, who was a raver, and I didn't know what the rave scene was. And this is in the early days. We're talking, this was 94. So, this is kind of like dance music. All of that was very underground still. It'd be in like bars and clubs, but like as far as like the rave scene, it was still very much not on the radar for folks. And so he took me to my first underground party, which was in Phoenix, Arizona, in this underground parking garage in downtown Phoenix, right? And he's like, don't worry. He's like, it's totally chill. You're gonna love it. And so he took me to this place, and we went to it. And I remember getting there, and I was like, where the hell are we? It's like no cars. Like, and I see this guy standing, and there's like some stairs, and I can just hear like, going off. And I'm like, where are we going? And he's like, no, trust me. He's like, you're gonna love this. And so we go down into this place, and I fell in love with the culture of it because it was very much, at least in those early days, there was like a purity to it. Like everyone was there. There wasn't alcohol in the scene. There was definitely ecstasy and other substances in the scene, but it wasn't like, there wasn't like anyone pushing it in your face, and people were there to dance. Everyone was there to just express themselves through dance. And I really love it. And there was no vibe of like, they're trying to hook up with you, they're trying to hit on you. It was just really clean in that way. And so I ended up falling in love with it. And we'd go out to, in the desert, there'd be a lot of desert events like that, underground parties like that. And eventually that led me to have my very first psychedelic experience, which actually was with MDMA. He always would ask me, do you want some? And I'd be like, I'm good. And I just would have a jug of water and I'd be dancing for hours. Everyone thought I was on something because I would just like be ripping, dancing, doing flips, going off. And everyone was like, because I train capoeira and I love to move my body. So everyone thought I was on, but I just feel like having a good time, which is water. And finally, we did this, there's an event called Basics. And I remember it was out in the forest near Strawberry, Arizona, pine forest. And, it was back in the days where you'd get a text to on a pager that would then tell you what number to call, to then get a checkpoint where you'd get then a map that then would take you to the checkpoint where then you'd get another direction from somebody of where to go, right? To like super hide the party. And we went there and there was this sound system called the Shredder sound system, which was like this 52 cabinets, huge bass cabinets. And so we get there and we're like, I think we're lost. We're like in the middle of the forest, like where are we? And finally we start seeing these semi trucks. We start seeing some cars and we get in there and it's incredible, like laser beams flying out of the trees. And we're like, wow, this is the most incredible thing we'd ever been to at that time. And I walk out and it was just incredible. This huge sound system in nature, outdoors, like in the forest. And it was just like, okay, he's like, do you want some now? And I was like, well, if I'm ever going to have it, like this feels good, not in a dark club or something, but actually like here on the land. And so, so we split one. It was liquid E back then. And so I had half of it and it opened up something where I danced harder than I'd ever danced before. And I never can forget, there was this moment when the sun was rising and I went over and I sat with this giant tree, this big pine tree. And I sat at the base of it and I watched the sun rising. And as it rose, I felt my whole body melt and meld into the root system of the tree. And I literally, for the first time, felt God. Like without the Jesuits telling me, hey, this is who God is. And even I would go in the summers and spend them with my mom up on the res, in the ceremonies in Sundance, and them telling me, great mystery, this is God. And all these, so I had all these kind of different questions, like, well, who really is this creator? And in that moment, like I felt it. It all made sense. Like, oh, they're all talking about the same thing. They just have their own lenses. And like, it all just made sense, but it wasn't like an intellectual thing. Like I felt it in an embodied way, like I'd never felt before. And that opened up a whole path for me because on that drive home that day, the day after, I really got clear. I was like, oh, I need to learn how to DJ. I was like, I want to do this. Like, I feel like connecting through this music, creating this experience for others. There's a medicine in this. There's a healing in this. And that put me on my path. Eventually got me to actually get my first turntables, my Techniques, my 1200s. I borrowed my grandfather's old record player at first. I got a Radio Shack mixer. I started making mixtapes. And that put me on the path of kind of performing. Mm-hmm. I never thought of to be a performer, but I knew that what I had experienced is something sacred that I wanted to be able to offer to others. And that really started on my road. So it kind of came in through DJing at first, back before everyone was a DJ. It was in the early days, yeah. And ironically, my father was a radio DJ back in his early days. He was he started the first bilingual radio station in Arizona.
Really?
Yeah, actually in Phoenix. Yeah, kind of doing, playing all kinds of funk and Latino kind of hits and mixing them with Brazilian bossa nova and jazz. And yeah, he was kind of already doing these mashups and doing bilingual programming, switching between Spanish and English. So it was kind of a beautiful way that it wove me back in. And I actually, when I went to Duke, that's how I paid my way through school, was also DJing for the frat and sorority parties on the side. And then I chartered my own organization there that ended up being called Groove Productions. And our whole goal was to create non-alcoholic, non-Greek events that would actually be able to bring in DJs and other underground people from the rave scene, but actually do it in a university context to offer an alternative to the Greek scene. And at that time, Duke was under kind of a lot of attention because there'd been a frat brother who had died of aspirated vomit. So there was a lot of heat on Duke. So Duke was actually very open. They're like, we need to find other programming for students. And so when I presented it to them, they're like, they funded it. And it was unreal. So we actually threw the first rave essentially in the therapeutic gardens. It was amazing. We brought fruit and all these things, and made this whole experience where we brought the Greek kind of scene into like the underground scene and brought them together in like a common way. It was really beautiful. And I was in an African ensemble, like a drumming ensemble. We brought the capoeiristas, and it was like this kind of merger, if you will, of all these different threads of all the hats I wore up to that point, which I'm still doing now. Like the irony is I was doing that was 2000. And so fast forward now 24 years, like I'm still doing it, right? I'm still bringing, like for me, I've left the DJ thing, and of course came back to the organic, like live thing, but it's still about creating the experience where we can come into a space intentionally and leave it feeling more connected, more whole. So it's kind of I hope I answered your question.
What a cool life. So interesting. Yeah, you answered part of the question. You answered the part how you got your beginning.
Yeah,
working with medicines.
Yeah. So So then
how has that evolved over the years in terms of just different types of experiences, depth, breakthroughs, pauses? Like how's that journey worked for you? Because it's so individual for people. I shared mine with you earlier. Which is kind of like a lot of missteps early in life. Huge break for a couple decades, and then much success ever since.
Totally.
So I'm always curious, and I share with you too, the onguitos, man. I mean, they're like, I remember having experiences where I realized my first realization was, wow, these are my little friends. They were my friends. And then there was like a deeper understanding. They were actually my family. We were related.
Yeah.
And it's like, even when I see them on my lawn, just, I don't know what kind of, I don't eat them. I don't know what they are, but I see those little guys and I'm like, oh, it's just like our little kids growing in the lawn, and they're going to sprout up. They'll be gone the next day. You know what I mean? Or in a couple of days. And so, so I was reminded of that, how special those strange little creatures are.
They're incredible. Yeah. And they have so much to teach us, even the random ones that kind of pop up in all kinds of places,
I was out in California last year, and I've always heard about them growing in cow pies, and, friends that, I don't know, lived in Oregon and were just like, oh, you don't need to buy shrooms. You just go out in the spring and pick 5 pounds, So I was on this hill, we were at this retreat, and I found some up on the hillside, and I started just hunting for cow pies. I was having so much fun. Took them to my room, dried them out, and then I started texting photos of them to my friends that know about these things, and they were like, no, that's not it. don't eat those. Yeah. I was like, I swear they look like it, and there's a couple different opinions. One guy's like, did they turn blue when you bruised them? I'm like, I don't think so, So I decided to err on caution, but that would have been my first wild foraging, of psilocybin, but it was unsuccessful. But yeah, the question is kind of, I don't know, what have been some of maybe the most impactful experiences you've had that have really, given you deep healing or insights?
Been so many. I think, to encapsulate it. So first experience I didn't see coming, but it came in that way through MDMA. Fortunately, it was really clean. I'm pretty sure what I had at that time, which was a blessing because it could have been all kinds of things, It was in such an early moment in that scene. The kind of the next experiences that really were pivotal for me was probably with onguitos, with my dear brother Siddhartha, who I mentioned earlier, neuroscientist. And so we would go out into the Duke forest, and we would have drop into a ceremony together, sitting out there on the river, and really deep kind of philosophical, because he was such a brilliant mind. He was doing his postdoc in neurosci at Duke. And so we would have these conversations about like what is really happening? Like, what is really happening that we even can have this experience right now, that this can open up this portal? And that's when I got kind of the big insight in teaching of death and rebirth. Onguitos are like these teachers of life after death. They're showing us that life never ends. Life continues. And in fact, so death isn't this thing to be feared. It's actually the thing to be celebrated. And that really helped me at that time, because I was kind of still sitting with death as like this kind of had a negative connotation in my life. My grandfather had passed on. I'd lost several really important individuals for me in my life. And so that helped like reframe all of that. And I was dating at that time a Brazilian partner who'd come up from Brazil to be with me actually when I was finishing Duke. And she was from the northeast of Brazil, Nordeste do Brasil. And she was an initiate in a lineage known as the UDV, or União do Vegetal. which is a church in Brazil that carries as their primary sacrament is ayahuasca, what we call ayahuasca, the daime. And so I went with her on one of our trips to Natal in northeastern Brazil to go sit in a ceremony. And, she hadn't been in a ceremony in a long time. And so, but they were old friends of hers. And so they're like, please come. And so many people might have different experiences or know of ayahuasca in different ways. There's many, many roads or lineages with grandmother. But of course, usually the commonality is that there's two main constituents of the plants, the vine and the leaf, which are combined to make the brew. And the name and how it's done, and then other helper plants that might be added. There's different ways in the Peruvian kind of side and lineages, more shamanic lineages in that way. Often the context will be sitting in the darkness, and having more of an individual experience. But most of the churches and the lineages in Brazil will be with lights on, and actually it's more as a collective. It's a collective experience, which is pretty different for those who've never experienced that. They're like, what? How would you even do that? Right? I don't want anybody to see me.
Yeah. And I've heard of that too. And I'm like, how do you stand up? Because right. Don't some of those ceremonies
sometimes you
involve...
get up and dance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
oh,
totally.
Boy.
No,
okay.
Exactly. So you really learn how to dance.
Yeah. Maybe that's what I need.
I think
to
that could
break
help.
Through that limitation, or at least perceived one.
It's so beautiful. So we went UDV, you do sit, but you sit kind of like you're in a kind of like leaning back in your chair. And the hardest part, honestly, was the fluorescent lights. They had fluorescent lights.
Oof.
That was rough.
Oof.
Yeah, that was really rough. And I didn't totally know what I was getting to. I knew, but I didn't know, And so, and there, people don't, there's nobody like tracking your buckets. There are no buckets, in fact. Everyone's just sitting. And it's like, and so I didn't totally know what I was getting to. And so, I ingested in the beautiful medicine, and the mestre started to sing this hymn, basically in Ícaro. It was so beautiful, and I went right into the vibration. And I closed my eyes because the light was so intense with the fluorescent lights, and the vision, I'll never forget it. It was my first experience, right, with this teacher plant. The vision came to me, and literally I saw my head was a seed pod, like a big seed pod. And all of a sudden I saw my head opening and the stars and the cosmos pouring out of my head. And suddenly I realized I was puking all over the floor. And I just leaned over and I was purging all over the floor. And everyone's like, uh-oh, new guy,
Yeah.
And I was just like, but it was the most beautiful purge of my life. Like literally I watched like the whole cosmos, like the Big Bang, just like on the floor. And then as I came to my senses, that I was in the room with fluorescent lights and everybody was sitting there kind of like, oh crap, like, shit, what do I do now? And someone, fortunately they were very kind and generous with me, kind of, came over and helped clean it up. But I felt super, like there was a moment of definite shame and like, oh man, that was a super rookie move, but it was so profound. And I'll never forget that first experience because it really set me on another layer, if you will, of my journey, with entheogens, with the plant teachers. My mother, in a lot of ways, was an herbalist, not formally, but she always worked with plant medicines. So I'd always had a real affinity with various plants and would work with them for healing in various ways. And we had different friends who were pages, like medicine people, of several tribes in Brazil, also in Mexico and in Arizona, in the Southwest. And so for me, like plant medicine wasn't foreign to me at all. But I'd never worked with grandmother, with ayahuasca in that way until that moment. And what it showed me and what I later would learn, and of course, and I've sat in now, I think pretty much most of the lineages, as I understand it, from the Santo Daime, Umban Daime, which is essentially brings in a lot of the Afro-Brazilian ceremony into it, that come from like candomblé. So in Umban Daime, often there's drumming, we'll play for many rounds, with dancing as part of that, and there's also possession, mediumship, where people will receive spirits in their body, which that's a whole universe into itself, all the way to say, the more mestizo, shipibo, other lineages, from Peru, where you have kind of a very different orientation, where it's much more individual work in the dark, and so having had now all those experiences, which have taught me over the years, and being steeped in it and trained in it now, also singing and playing music for ceremony from now, since that time forward. Um, I yeah, my outlook and my orientation to it, whenever I go back to grandmother and to a lot of these teacher plants, is I get the same message now from them. They're like, "What are you doing here? Have you done the things that you know to do? Have you integrated?" And I kind of get a bit of a scolding these days. So my general orientation now is like, keep doing the work. Like I don't actually need the plant teachers anymore. Like I'm in a place, not to say I don't, I'm perfect or anything like that. It's more of a place of like, I am at a point where it's like I know what I have to do. Like it's chop wood, carry water, and like have I done it? Yay or nay, And it's like it's really clear. And so whenever I sit anymore, they just kind of give me the schooling. So it's like I kind of go with a lot of humility always when I go back, because it's like it's beautiful. It'll be beautiful experiences. I don't have like, knock on wood, I've never really had a bad trip ever. I've had challenging trips, but they've always been opportunities for me to just look at stuff that I needed to look at. And at this point in my life, it's like I access those realms and I'm tapped into those realms pretty constantly. And through the music's always taking me back. And so they're like coursing through my veins, and that's coming through me then in the channel when I'm bringing through the music. And so I'm able to call upon them as allies when I'm in, a dense festival energy, where there's all kinds of mixed substances in the field. And so I'm able to call upon them as allies to come in and like lace the space, if you will, to help people get a healing, because they're open, whether they realize it or not. They're open. That's why they call alcohol spirits. It's
right.
It's you're open. Right. And so what are you in training to? Because your normal body is now, your energetic body is wide open. So that's why parasitic organisms, entities can come in and literally occupy us if we don't inhabit our space. And so it's very important, in American, I say American, North American, United States kind of mainstream culture, we don't talk about that stuff. That's kind of weird stuff. That's voodoo and all that stuff, right? But those ways are very much deep scientific, have their own science, their own technology that are very, very much understood and practiced and mastered in other lineages, whether that be from Ifa, originating all the way back from Africa, to the various also indigenous peoples who knew how to work with mediumship. So it's not like a new thing, but I know it's kind of a more fringe thing still to the mainstream, but it is something to be aware of, and it's not like some, just X-Files thing. It's like, no, this is a real thing. There's spirits and they will come into your being when you're leaving yourself wide open. Because you need to be, you need to have discernment and kind of, protect yourself. There's various tools that we use, that I've been trained to since I was a little boy. It's like even taking baths with like salt, coarse salt, like actually you bathe yourself in salt to be able to pull and clear your energetic body, your physical body. And
it's funny you would naturally delve into that, because my last question was I always want to be responsible when I talk about this particular topic, right? Yeah. Because I'm so stoked about it, and I think, well, everyone should just do it all the time. It's like, on an exercise, you said discernment and prudence. So my question was around, what are some of the things that people would maybe be, which you've spoken to some degree, but people would be advised to be mindful of, like some of the risks involved for people who hear a podcast like this and go, wow, I want to do that level of healing, or I want to meet God that I've heard about and has remained a mental construct. I want to have a tangible experience of that. So there's so much benefit to be had, but I know that I did it very recklessly earlier in life and caused myself a lot of harm. I don't think anyone else, but definitely my own psyche. Yeah. Put myself in some pretty dangerous situations and just a lot of darkness and weird shit when I was in really vulnerable places on LSD and whatever else, So what would be your kind of cautionary advice for people who are curious and not yet experienced, or people who are kind of putting their toe in the water and getting maybe overly enthusiastic about that kind of work?
Yeah, and thank you. I think that's a really good question. And definitely right now in the context of what's happening with the psychedelic renaissance, if you will, I feel like that's probably very important more than ever. Because you have so much kind of a wide variety, I guess, a spectrum of kind of novice folks getting into this space and wanting to learn and feeling excitement. And you also have a lot of novice folks who are feeling called to then also be facilitators and to provide these experiences, and, who have a weekend with grandmother ayahuasca, and then they're like, oh no, ayahuasca told me I'm a facilitator. Like that, how many times does that happen? Right? Like,
Dude, every time I've sat with medicine, I think I'm going to be a facilitator the next day. Thankfully I come out of it and I'm like, what? No, dude, you don't have the training, Yeah.
There's a reason why so many, like, to be actually a mestre, whether in the Brazilian traditions, a master of ceremony, in those ways, whether you're in the UDV or the Santo Daime Church, or whether you're a curandero, vegetalista, essentially shaman, for lack of a better word, in the, the Peruvian, for instance, traditions, lineages, or Colombia, or, Ecuador. There's a reason why they have to do a very lengthy process of apprenticeship and dieting, dieta, as they call it, right? There's a reason for that. I kind of, the parallel that I know from my experience is also too, like, is Sundance. Sundance is one of the rituals that we have to undertake when you want to become a medicine person, when you want to carry that chanupa. Chanupa is commonly known as the peace pipe, right? But that pipe, which isn't just a pipe, it's actually it's a very powerful tool for healing and unifying and translating prayers. And so to work with that at all, to do it correctly, and there's people who, of course, pour a sweat lodge, work with that chanupa, offer the pipe, who've never done any of these traditional ways. They just go and they buy it at a trading post, and like, there you go. Just like there's like folks who will, they got their hands on some ayahuasca and they'll be like, hey, I'm going to pour this for you, and like, we'll make a prayer. And to say that that's good or bad, it's not to say that it's good or bad. It's like, I'm never going to tell someone don't pray. It's like, freaking A, pray. Because the more people praying, the better, I think, in the end of the day, as long as you have that right intention. Yes. However, be careful, know what you're doing with. And I really invite you to find teachers, find the lineage, be connected to the lineage. There's a reason for this, because in the lineage, just like we were talking back in the beginning of our conversation, you can't isolate these things from the whole. The whole is what carries the actual medicine and all the tools and all of the wisdom, the knowing, the body of knowledge. It's not a coincidence that we say that in the language and the expression body of knowledge. It's not just knowledge. There's a body of knowledge, and the body of knowledge is embodied, and it comes through the lived experience of having gone through really difficult things and learning from a master, man or woman, or, non-binary. Because the master, right, that mastery, and of course the teachers are the masters, right? The plants themselves are the teacher, the master teachers. Same thing in the Red Road, the master itself is the chanupa. The chanupa is the teacher. And they all link back to the original pipe that was gifted from the white buffalo calf woman, that still exists to this day and is protected and held. And so all of our chanupas link back to that original one that was brought by the white buffalo calf woman as a tool to connect and allow us to heal and create communication and common understanding. And it came with all these ceremonies and rituals. So that, if you just take that thing out of context and try to just, oh, now I've got this thing, it's like you miss actually the power and the embodied wisdom that is there for you to be able to be effective and to do so with mastery. And so same thing goes with the plants. And so I understand now, like at first I was like, why do you have to go through the Sundance to be able to pour a lodge? I just want to pour a lodge. It's like, it's a sweat. I'm just going to sweat some hot rocks, put some water on it. No big deal, right? And now that I've been through this, as a dancer now I'm coming on my 7th year as a dancer, and I've been supporting since I was a little boy. My mother was a dancer for 8 years, from when I was very young up until I was 16. So 8 to 16. And I've come to understand that you have to go through the rites of passage of that process, because that is what prepares you to be able to receive the actual wisdom. So the body of knowledge, and then there's the wisdom, which comes only through the actual experience of having walked through the fire. And so and I'm jumping between two different parallels here, right? But like in the context of like the Sundance, having gone through a ritual where you have to fast for 4 days, no food, no water, you're dancing in the heat of the sun in the peak of summer, and you are doing so, then you're offering your flesh through a piercing ritual, part of the ritual. There's many rituals within the main ritual. There's many prayers within that prayer, right? To ancestors, to those passed on, for healing, for abundance, for healing, being able to connect with the divine through the music. All of these are woven into the fabric of it. When you look at any one of the lineages, whether it be the Shipibo, whether it be the Mestizo way, whether it be, the Santo Daime, whether it be the Udeve, they each have their own roads that you have to walk through and diet and prepare your body and your vessel to receive the actual deeper teaching. They don't just give it to you all at once. You couldn't handle it all at once.
It's not a weekend seminar.
It's not a weekend seminar.
You just reminded me of the first time I prayed with peyote was with my wife Allison, and it was actually our third date. It's a great way to get to know someone. And I'd never been in a ceremony that was that, for lack of a better term, strict.
Yeah.
Right, like no sleeping, no laying down, no leaving the space. All of this, and it was of course beautiful, but challenging for me in that there was a lot of formalities and rigidity, what I perceive to be rigidity, right? The intentionality. But more than anything, there were so many rituals upon rituals upon rituals upon rituals, right? It wasn't just like, okay, we're starting the ceremony, here's our prayer, drink some medicine, and then we'll see in a few hours. It was just like, okay, now we're doing this, now we're doing the flower blessing, now we're doing this. Yeah. It was just like on and on and on. And it was amazing. But for someone like me who just kind of wants to be freewheeling and have, in times in my life lack discipline, it was challenging. And I don't know that I was like fighting it per se. I mean, I was pretty good at just surrendering to the process, but it wasn't until afterward that I was able to see the gifts and see really the purpose of all of the rituals upon rituals upon rituals within the ceremony, one of which being the shaman, I don't think they call themselves shamans in this case, but the facilitators, during the flower blessing, Alice and I, we knew each other as friends, but we're on our third date, and they call us up to the altar and they married us. You are now married. Huh? And it scared the shit out of me, right? Because I'm trying to be mindful and take it slow. And I mean, I had the best of intentions, and it really was a beautiful opening in our relationship, because the experience Allison was having was much different than what I was having in that marriage, And then we got to have a great conversation about it later, which led to us becoming a couple that weekend. But it was a really informative experience for me, and just seeing like, oh, this is no joke. This isn't a game. Like these prayers mean something. This fire means something.
Yes.
Every song means something. It's taking us somewhere. Going outside for the sunrise means something. Mm-hmm. There's a depth to it that I think is kind of easy to miss if you're not really looking for it, right? Otherwise, you can just, as I said, for me, I'm kind of like, why do we got to do all this stuff? Like, just give me more peyote. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And especially that one for me, I think has been a huge ongoing lesson in that. I mean, I just sat with ayahuasca a couple weeks ago, and I would say that was my most challenging medicine experience ever. Not because of like pain I had to face or anything. It was just physically brutal. And I could not understand what was happening because I've never had that happen before. And so with the early lessons in peyote, and the lesson a couple weeks ago was in trusting the teacher, the medicine, even when it's subtle. Mm-hmm. Because I don't want to be just knocked on my ass. I'm cool in the extreme range, right? It's just kind of how I'm wired.
Yeah.
In the subtlety, that's where I start to resist a bit or doubt. And my trust is much harder to grasp or to kind of practice in those moments, because I'm kind of sitting there like, when's this going to happen? And I'm ignorant of the fact that this is what's supposed to happen. It is happening. It's just not happening in the way that I want it to or think it should.
Right.
And I'm comparing it to situations in the past where the last time it was like this other way. I like that better. All that comparison, the expectations of attachment. Where are those insights? Where's God? Shouldn't I be seeing God? All the things. And it's like, I learned so much in hindsight, working with peyote in that very traditional kind of regimented way. Yeah. But it took some time to unpack it after that, and Allison would catch me over the years, and I'd be like, I don't like peyote, it's brutal. And she'd like, dude, did you hear what you just said? Take that back. I was like, shit, thank you.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
It just at the time wasn't what I thought was going to happen, you know, these expectations. So I love that you bring in that intentionality and the historical relevance and the cultural, you know, through the eons of human beings participating in these ceremonies and rituals. Like there's much more there than I think you could ever even unpack in a lifetime, no matter how often you sit and who you sit with. It's like this stuff is deep in our DNA.
Deep.
And it really deserves respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that about, you know, Hikori Peyote, right? Has he's such a powerful grandfather teacher, you know. It's
ass kicker, dude.
Yeah, for sure. It's different than ayahuasca. Like he has his own, you know, it's his own it's its own frequency that teaches so much. And that ceremony, especially in the TP meetings, you know, in the traditional, whether you in the NAC way or in Wirikuta, like, you know, with the Huichol people, the way that that's held, the way that that teacher is brought through. Yeah, it's definitely not a ceremony of like, oh, this is like a vacation.
We're just hanging out.
We're just hanging out. Definitely not, you know.
I remember going outside to pee, and you know, if I was out there too long, someone would come get me.
Oh, come get you, yeah.
We'd like to welcome you back in the teepee.
And that was nice. They let you go out and pee. Sometimes they don't let you go out and pee.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, so I had it easy.
I've had to hold that 8 hours, and you're like, oh.
I just remember my you know, leaning on a back jack and like trying to pretend like I'm not sleeping. Yeah.
Oh, you had a really easy
I did. I had a cush.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
we've had to sit up on knees.
Are you serious?
The whole time.
And I remember it just being, it was in Joshua Tree in the winter, and it was freezing, you know, and I'm in there with 5 parkas, and it was challenging. But the gift of it, you know, is like, I got a wife.
It's beautiful.
I mean, you know.
No, it's true.
But
it's
really,
true. You did.
I don't,
You did.
it wouldn't, there's no way it could have unfolded the way it unfolded without all of the magic that was taking place, and just everything coalesced in a very specific way to facilitate the opening of our love, you know. So I'm always grateful for that.
The cadence of that ceremony, you know, is so specific and perfect. Like the way that everything comes in and out, and the way that the fire is tended, and the coals, you probably receive like the designs and the coals. I mean, that, you know, it is the fire, you know, the fire, and the hikori is the chief. That's who's driving the ceremony. There might be a roadman or road woman, but that's actually the chief. That's who they refer to, you know, we refer to as the chief. But it's the way that the whole ceremony is architected, and the way that it's held by the whole community is the healing. That is the healing. It's like really, in the end, the entheogenic kind of, you know, physical response, if you will, you know, of the journey is only a very small part of that. It's actually more about the architecture of that, and how we are then made open and receptive to then receive the intelligence that's coming from the elementals. So it's really about the elementals, about the element of fire, the first water that comes in, right? The way that the wind is moving through and the air is circulating through the teepee itself, right? It's like, and of course the earth element, and that beautiful half moon, crescent moon bridge there, that is the walk of life itself, the bridge, as you pass through the journey of your life from beginning to end, and like passing through with a beloved in this case. So I mean, that's, and I mean, that's a whole, you know, so that's why I share like,
that's a whole podcast in itself.
In and of itself.
Probably a few of them.
A few. And so just to kind of like to your question, like I would just say to those out there who would like to travel these roads, I just invite you really, especially now, as like I said before, we're in this psychedelic renaissance, vet your teachers, vet your facilitators. Make sure you don't just sit with anybody. Like really be mindful. Don't just do it because, I really want to, and this is the first thing that shows up, you know. I really encourage you to take the care to really sit with people from the original lineage if you can. Like I believe that myself. Like I you know, there's a lot of folks who've studied with someone, but like go to the source. You know, like for instance, I'll give you an example, like Iboga, right? Like I really want to sit with that teacher. It's been calling me for many years, but it hasn't been the right moment. And I'm waiting to go sit with the Bwiti people, like to go, you know, to Africa and be able to sit with them. And I've been waiting, and it's coming closer. Like I feel it's like imminent. And my good friend, Dr. Dan Engel, which you know, Dan, Dan just was initiated by the Bwiti people.
Really?
Yeah. In this last year. And,
wow.
and you know, and he's it's really profound. Like I'm feeling that call. And so I really appreciate like going to the source. And I feel that, you know, and again, doing that in a good way. Don't do it in a way that's colonizer, extractive, you know, like how do we do that in a good way? Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important. I think there's something to be said about that, to be able to receive the whole of that frequency of that, the intelligence, the whole embodied knowledge of that you can receive it directly from the people and not in,
It also sets the standard, right? It's like calibrates you for what a legitimate, tightly held, integrous container looks and feels like.
Yeah.
I think that's one way to fortify yourself, or if you end up in a situation, or to help you vet people that you might sit with, or be able to even intuit and invite, like, who are they? What are their names? Let me look at their Instagram or whatever, right? And you're kind of like, you get that feeling. I've had that happen a number of times, you know, where I think, oh, this sounds cool. And then I kind of feel interested and I go, well, I don't know. I sat with these Shipibo people. They've been serving medicine like every night for 25 years.
For generations.
Yeah, for generations. We don't even know how long, how far back, right?
Before recorded history.
And it's not like, you know, trying to make a hierarchical system or something, but there is something to be said for the traditional nature. And there's a reason why these traditions have subsisted. And I think it's a great way to sort of set your template, right? To calibrate yourself to that and then move out from there.
Right.
Right. But if that's kind of your foundation, it's like if for example, having had that, you know, very traditional few first experiences with peyote, I don't know. I think if it wasn't like that, I would probably feel like, I don't know. It's a little sloppy. You know, I think I'd just be more kind of picky in a good way about how I would sit, having had that be my first experience. You know, it's like your first experience of anything. If you're sitting with a master painter or music teacher or whatever, then that becomes your baseline and how you move forward, rather than just kind of starting out willy-nilly and kind of winging it. And then you're going to be set on a course of winging it that could be less than perfect. I want to share one other thing with you, which I think is valuable to some of the listeners, hopefully. And how do I frame this? All right. So I was telling you earlier, I was sober for 22 years, like very avid meditator, yogi, 12-step programs, every self-help program, every freaking workshop, body work. I mean, every healing modality under the sun, right? So I had all kinds of therapy, worked through a lot of stuff, and had become a pretty well integrated person, done a lot of healing. And then when I started working with medicine, so in other words, like I had a pretty solid moral character by that time, you would hope. In 22 years, like you better evolved a bit, right? And I did. Not that I was perfect, but I was, you know, a reliable, solid, integrous, honest, loving, kind person most of the time. Not doing any shady shit. And so when I went and sat with medicine over those first couple of years, and I had such deep healing that made me even more morally sound, gave me an even closer relationship with my values, and made me even cleaner. And anything that was like a little bit funky had to be dealt with, you know, because that's what happens. You really face all your shadows, right? So, because I became like cleaner and more refined, more mature, more open to love and all those things, I naively thought that that's the way it is for everyone working with medicine. And so I've been shocked to hear, I haven't had any negative experiences myself, but been shocked to hear that, you know, someone is marketing themselves as a facilitator or shaman and then abusing people, or like weird shit like that happening. And I have had some interactions with people that work with medicine a lot, and their energy doesn't align with me. And I feel like a couple of them have been pretty far out of integrity, just objectively. And it's been a learning process for me to not just trust that everyone has had the experience of refinement that I've had, just because they work with medicine a lot.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of wacky people out there working with psychedelics who are still all shadowy and fucking weird, to be honest, which, you know, I'm like a little naive and kind of blind sometimes to things like that. I think just because it's just in my nature, I'm high empathy, and I just kind of give people the benefit of the doubt. And it's kind of a shadow side of my kindness and compassion, which is a beautiful thing. But the shadow side of that is kind of being gullible and naive. And I've been a little bit gullible and naive around the medicine space, because I just have taken for granted that you tell me you sit with medicine, you know, 50 times. I'm like, oh, you're trustworthy. I just automatically trust you because I figure you've gone to the depths and cleaned out all the muck in your shadow, right? And it's like not everyone has. No. And people are picking up entities and all kinds of weird stuff. So that's been a lesson for me that I think is important to share, is just like, you know, don't think someone's enlightened just because they've, you know, drank ayahuasca 150 times. You know, there's a lot more. Like you said, the real work is kind of in the integration and outside of the ceremony itself. And
so a lot of shenanigans. There's a lot of shenanigans.
That's funny. Yeah. So I just want to speak to that.
Be wary of anyone who calls himself a shaman. I think that's one of them. I think is one of my metrics. You know, it's like I always track that, because it's like same in capoeira. You know, in the old days, you know, you wouldn't have a tile and say, I'm a mestre. Now I'm a mestre. Like, you know, like a karate dojo. You know what I mean? Now I'm a karate, you know, black belt. It's like it's the community is who dubs you this. It's not you can't just proclaim it yourself. It's actually something that, so in the old days, right? Who was the shaman? Who was the medicine man? Who was the page? They were the people that everyone knew had the healing knowledge and was a healer from the time they were a little child. They already had this ability, this gift, and it was already seen before they even knew that they had it themselves. The people already saw it in them. And so often it wasn't something that they could just like suddenly say, today I am this, you know, proclaim it. And it's something that, because of the way society is organized nowadays, we don't live in the village anymore. It's easy, you know, it's easy for these things not to have this kind of inherent vetting process that was already there when we lived in more of a tribal unit. And so now in our society, that's why it's like, so it's really easy for people to kind of become perpetrators within that space, especially when it's a fringe kind of space that now has a lot of energy pointed at it because it's becoming more mainstreamy. You know, I see that happening. And so there's a lot of folks that will abuse that and take advantage of that, you know, and not even consciously. There's folks that really think they're doing good work, but they're actually not prepared to really hold the space and to help people when they're in crisis. And this is what I was kind of getting at with before. Like, I understand why I have to go through the Sundance ceremonial process to be able to even pour a lodge, because that literally tempers me, so that when things not when things are going easy and everything's great, it's when shit hits the fan. It's when things really go into crisis. Someone has a psychological break. Someone really freaks out. Do you know the right Icaro? Do you know the right plant to call upon? Do you know the right thing to do in that moment to bring them back to themselves, to help weave them deeper, to help bring the trauma up and actually release it and integrate it?
Like being trained as a spiritual EMT.
100%. That is exactly right. Know? That's why it's like we don't just give anyone a scalpel, right?
That's
say, like,
why
here you go. It's like,
that's why I don't serve medicine, even though I really want to, because I just love the field. I love that experience. Every time I work with Bufo, I'm like, I'm definitely supposed to start doing this tomorrow. Where can I get this stuff? I'm going to start inviting people over. We're going to do this every day. And then I'm like, I don't think I'm quite ready for that. You know,
people ask me all the time, do you serve? Do you serve? Do you serve? And I'm like, I serve the musical medicine.
Yeah.
I already knew early on, and like she showed me my path. Like I could do that. There's been opportunities and doorways and great teachers to apprentice with, but it's always been like, what I'm actually here to do is to serve the music medicine. That is the ceremony. And so I can do that at a festival. I can do that, you know, in a large stage or a small intimate gathering or one-on-one. And for me, the reminder is that in my own kind of orientation to it is that like, we are the medicine. Music is medicine. If we can remember how to access this medicine through just our own experience in this human body, you know, and be able to connect to that resonance and coherence, and we don't actually need to imbibe in something, that is actually really powerful. Because it came to me early on in my path with the entheogenic planets that there isn't enough ayahuasca to wake the whole world up. We would totally decimate the forests 10 times over before we'd ever get critical mass tipping point of enough people to have drank ayahuasca to like have an awakening experience. And so that insight really led me to see like, actually, we need to be able to create and foster ways for people to access these states with just what's built in, with just what is free, what's here.
Yeah.
And that's what actually got me to really start to hone in on that. So like we have a platform called Music is Medicine. And it's been kind of something my partner and I, we've really been, you know, developing for some years now. And part of that is we do retreats, like in-person retreats, you know, anywhere from 25 to 50 people.
Don't you guys have one coming up?
We do actually, yeah.
Which will be,
We have one
this will be out before that. Boulder and Utah, September 24th through 30th, 2024.
That's
Do I
right.
have that
Yeah,
right?
the end of September. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And it's going to be in Boulder, Utah. And
Boulder, Utah.
Boulder,
not,
Utah.
Not Boulder, Colorado,
not Colorado.
and somewhere in Utah. Okay, I looked at the dates. I was like, how are they going to do it in two places at once?
Yeah.
Boulder, Utah.
Boulder, Utah.
And what's the website where people could find out more?
Poranguí.com. My name.
It's on your main site.
Porangui.com. And then we're doing one in Estonia earlier than that in July, for anyone in Europe or wants to come over to Europe. But we've been doing at least twice a year. And these retreats basically are like a 7 day deep dive into this work, which I do workshops too often. Like when I present at different events, festivals, I'll teach a workshop as well. And in the workshop, it's like a little mini taste of it. But essentially, it's about honing our ability to be the instrument. So it's for all levels. It's for folks who are, touring musicians, all the way to someone who's like terrified of their own voice. And it's really powerful to get us together and to work in circle to actually access and open up the field, much like the plants do, but being able to do it through music, through sound and vibration, through dance. And this is something that it's been this really powerful curriculum that's been evolving over the last several years. And I love it because I literally have people come in and we're just like, wow, I had no idea this was here all along. Like it's right here. I don't have to go to some store and buy something. I don't need to, it's like, it's right here.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to put all that, you guys, in the show notes at lukestorey.com/Poranguí. I got one last question for you. It's a three-parter.
Yeah. Okay.
Who have been three teachers or teachings, philosophies, etc., in your life that have influenced who you are today?
Three teachers. Wow. Okay. The three, I would give you Bobby McFerrin.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's unexpected.
Yeah. Bobby McFerrin, master, been one of my greatest teachers and inspirations. Truly a Jedi master. While we have him, go see him. If you haven't seen him yet in the flesh, he's struggling. He has Parkinson's. So I know he's getting into a stage where he won't be able to tour anymore, but if you can see him, go catch him. I've had the honor to study with him and be in circle song with him. Truly, as far as like true mastery, embodied mastery of being able to be in complete improvisation, being able to create music and ride the surfboard on the edge of annihilation and being able to channel total genius from the divine through as a hollow bone. He's got it. He's Bobby McFerrin. Another teacher that I would also say, would be several. So I'm just like, ooh. I would put out there comes to me is Mestre Ramos. Mestre Ramos was one of my teachers of capoeira and one of my mestres. And early on in my path studying capoeira, and what he really passed on to me, which I still work with to this day, is the power in capoeira. For those who don't know, capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art / dance form. It came out of slavery in Brazil, about 500 years tradition, and much older in the way that originated from Africa. But then as the way it was expressed during slavery is it had to be this martial art training form that was disguised as a dance. And it's very deep. It's very symbolic because in capoeira, it's not about actually taking out your opponent. It's about showing that you could have taken out your opponent. And so it's the symbolic power. It's like symbolic victory over someone. And it's actually in the real victor, if you will, the real winner. Not that there is really a winner or a loser, but the winning is when you have mastery over your body. And so it's the mastery of being able to be just as effective on your hands as you are on your feet, be able to be totally dominating of gravity itself and be freed of gravity. And in this way, the slave in the roda, or in the circle, becomes the master. So it's the inversion of this slave master dynamic. This axis is inverted literally, physically and symbolically. And you're not a real capoeirista until not only you can do all the incredible movements with your body and question and answer in this like chess match, but also by playing and dominating all the instruments. So you have to be able to play and be musical in all aspects. No other martial art has music as a fundamental
Wow, I
pillar
didn't
of
know
it.
that. That's really cool.
And it's so cool because the music speaks to the game. So if there's two players in the game, the music is informing the game. So the mestre, whoever's leading the beating bow, it's like a bowed instrument with one monochord instrument with a gourd. They'll be playing and they're going to sing a specific song. Like for instance, if you have like a big guy and a little guy playing, right? They might sing a song like, "Oh Siri boto gamelera no chão, oh boto boto gamelera no chão, oh Siri boto." Siri is a little crab. Gamelera is a giant tree. And the lyric is saying the little crab knocked down the big tree, right? So he's like kind of like invoking this game, right? Showing the underdog being able to take down. It's not about the size of the individual, but their cunning, their ability to think on their feet. And so I really, one of my great teachers, I would say would be him. And then I'd say my third teacher, I would like to really offer to my father Gustavo Eduardo Magru, who's been an incredible teacher to me. He's really taught me probably one of the core lessons and questions, leading questions of my life. How do you leave it more beautiful than you found it? You know, and that has been something that he's taught me ever since I was a little boy, that has lived with me, you know, every day. You know, it's the question I still lead with, and it connects very much to a Dene concept, the Navajo concept of Hojon, which is translated loosely as beauty way. And the beauty way, how to walk in beauty, how to bring beauty, not narcissistic beauty, but the beauty that leaves this world more radiant and full of life. The beauty that, you know, how do we bring that to our relationships, the way we communicate? How do we bring beauty to any place that we enter? How do we bring more understanding? How do we bring more grace? And so, I'd say that's my third.
Well, you brought beauty to this podcast episode, my friend. Thank you so much, dude.
Thank you.
So glad I was able to catch you. It's difficult to catch people on tour, you know, and when I ran into you the other day, I'm like, kind of shy about asking people to be on the podcast for some reason. It's something I'm working on, but I was like, I'm just going to ask him. And he's probably on tour, you know, he'll say no. And you're like, yeah, I'm actually here for a few days, just chilling. I was like, wow, okay.
It's so rare.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure, like I looked on your site, I'm like, this dude's touring a lot, you know? So I feel really blessed to be able to spend some time with you. And thanks for coming over and, you know, doing the whole Saturday lunch and just chilling. It's been really fun to get to know you.
Yeah, thank you.
And you shared so much wisdom with the audience too, and I'm sure people are just going to love this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. Honored to be here with you all.